Mr. Chair, you are now live.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Is there any reason why we shouldn't start? That's a good reason. Okay, everyone, welcome to Thursday, November 19th, 2020's 7 p.m. Planning Commission virtual public meeting. I will now call this meeting to order. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. And please, Tammy, can we get a roll call?
Mr. Sale,
Here.
Mr. Wallman,
Present.
Mr. Pline,
Present.
Ms. Butler,
Present.
Mr. Imes.
Here. All right, and also staff, we should also be seeing Mr. Beard and obviously Ms. Hook, Joelle, who I know is also here, Dr. Nash, and Kevin Scott, I believe, is also online. So there we go. And it's nice that we have we have two agendas now that are supplied to whoever is chairman in the future. You have a regular rough draft, and you also have one where the members you should expect and people you should expect at the meeting, which is a Zoom meeting participant outline, which we will also see more of when we start allowing even outside persons to participate in the meeting other than just the staff and the members of the commission. All right, let's move on to item number C, the approval of minutes. We have the November 5th minutes. And give me a second, I can bring those up for us. Let me check. If you already have those minutes that were sent out, please start reviewing them, but I'll also bring them up to just show them. Okay, here we go. There we go. There's your minutes. In case you don't have them or haven't reviewed them. And especially down there in the miscellaneous, you see the December 3rd request to have the public comments be active in the meeting for live testimony. I have no further comments with regard to the meeting. Anyone else? Within minutes, anyone else?
I move we adopt as written.
I'll second that motion. Any discussion?
Oh, I just have a quick question about the time that people, if they want to testify, they have to notify. The cutoff time is noon, the day of the meeting they want to testify, correct?
Yes, as we see, I'll put that, because that's the city council standard, is cut off on the day of. And we asked for
The day of.
12. I think that's very fair for us to get stuff done, especially in the afternoon. You got a lot going on in the planning office. So.
Absolutely. All right, thanks.
Any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed? Any abstentions? The motion so carries. The minutes are approved as drafted. Thank you very much. We'll move on to item number D, which is approval of findings of the small cell systems for the purpose of establishing requirements for small cell systems, et cetera, et cetera. And also there's resolution 4120 and 4220, which are the fees and fines associated with those small cell systems. So the findings, we had the last draft that we worked in advance with Dr. Nash being the last commenter on that draft. And I'm going to display that one. I'll stop share for that item and move along to the other. Pardon me for 20 seconds. Okay, this is the last copy that you should have seen. Dr. Nash made some last edits before, I'm sorry, after Mr. Waldman had made his final drafts. There were no other inputs that I received over the last week. Are there any other inputs that I'm not aware of other than Mr. Waldman's and Dr. Nash's? Okay, well, here we go.
The only thing, Mr. Sale, the only thing that occurs to mind is I'm reminded that we did have discussion about pegging the fees and fines to the rate of inflation. And
Yes.
I don't recall if that was included, that recommendation was included in this in this larger recommendation. So could you continue
I
to?
put it in under recommendation, Bob, if you,
Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you.
if you can scroll down, Ben, to the,
There it is. See, it's highlighted right here.
Okay, thank you. Okay, good. Thanks.
And Bob, I know you sent an email to everyone that outlined the changes, and we read that. But if you want to hit those up again, if you feel the need to, please go right ahead.
Well, let's see, is the legislation here? No. No.
This is just the
No, that's
findings.
fine. I think I've said what needs to be said.
Actually, we do have, the legislation is part of the document. So.
All right, so continue scrolling. There. All I needed to do with A there is just, it wasn't, it only said that, anyway, I needed to make clear that these systems are, have to comply with both the code and with the guidelines and regulations that the department establishes. That's the only upfront and clear. And then if you can continue scrolling down and you can pass the table of uses and everything else, I don't think there's any other changes until we get to the, really that one. It's just as simple and as clear as I could make it, that they're standards, rules, and guidelines. I used all of the words that we talked about at length last time. And then what that document, the regulations need to include, but are not limited to those subjects, because those are the ones that, were first placed in front of us. There may be others. The council may wish to add others, but that's all I did. I got rid of all of the details and just made it a policy statement and left it to the department to set the rules and guidelines.
I had a quick question. The notice of installation to abutting property owners. And we had notices for major site design or major developments before, which were extended. The notice of installation to abutting property owners, is that just limited to abutting property owners, or is there anything more extensive than that for notification? Anybody from planning and zoning?
this wouldn't be a certain radius. It would just be neighbors who were right next to the installation.
Okay. Of course, that could always be changed in the future if we felt the need. But abutting property owners only get notified in this case. I'm thinking, I wonder if we shouldn't expand that. I don't, just throwing that out there. I know it's late in the game. It can always be done after that. It can be done later, but just a thought. I don't think now is a good time for that, but possibly later as part of our guidelines in the city, because this doesn't limit it, but it just makes note that it is something we might want to think about in our guidelines from planning and zoning as we adopt more and more of those as we go down this road. Okay. Anything else, Mr. Waldman, down the page?
No,
That's it.
that's it.
Back up to the comments section. There's the recommendations, meat and potatoes. And this is what we probably should really point out to the general public that's watching, which Mr. Waldman specifically wanted to point out. This is one of the, I'd say, the beginning of the flow of documents coming from the Planning Commission that Mr. Waldman has spearheaded. Thank you very much. Also the city's trend to simplify the code, to remove the council from having to decide detailed regulations, and to set policies which are manifested by standards and regs guidelines established by the departments. So we let the experts get in there and really modify these standards and regs and guidelines to be what they need to be with oversight from the city council and us commissioners. So I think that's a great move forward in simplifying our city code and putting it in the hands of people who are the experts with the acronyms behind their name. Okay, any other comments with regard to the findings? In that case, do we have a motion for approval of the findings as written and modified, as you see? I'll make a motion to approve the findings as written.
A second.
I have a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing nothing. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed? Any abstentions? The findings are approved as drafted. And most notably, we will get rid of the minor spelling corrections, of course, as we always do after the fact. Thank you, Mr. Waldman, for a very nice job on that. And everyone else clearly not having much comment towards it shows how well it was written. Okay, that takes care of the findings. On item D, and just to be careful what we're doing here, those findings are for small cell systems and the targeting the ordinance 02920, but the resolution of 4120 and 4220, which are the fees and fines. This in a title does not cover that for findings. And for the fees and fines, we didn't, we deliberated and talked about that, but we didn't want to really come to any further conclusions on that. Is there anything anyone else wants to note on the fees and fines other than when we recommended tying those to the inflation rate, but then pulling that back? Okay. So no further comment on the fees or fines as well. Thank you very much. Before we move on to new business, anyone else want to make a comment on findings and the small cell systems? Any item with that?
There is. I will second that. I want to give it Mary Ann.
Is somebody trying to talk because I can't hear you, or is that just background noise in somebody's computer? Diane, was that you? You have a look of guilt. Okay, we'll move right along. Thank you very much. Moving on to new business.
Mr. Sale, I'm sorry to interrupt. Did you vote on those 2 and 3? Did I miss it?
The small cell system fees and fines, we don't actually have a set of findings to display right now for that.
Okay.
What we do have is the findings for the ordinance of 029-20.
I heard that, but I thought there was findings for the other 2. So.
No, you don't need to do findings for the resolutions.
Okay, thank you.
Because fees and fines, we didn't feel that was within the best of our purview of expertise and left that more to planning and zoning department heads to make in line with let me get the wording right from our last meeting, more in line with what other jurisdictions are doing. And they're going to go and research that and put that into the policies and guidelines coming from the Planning and Zoning Department. Did I frame that right, Dr. Nash, from our verbiage from the last meeting? Anyone else?
Perfect.
Sounds good. Okay, great. All right. Does that satisfy you, Tammy?
Yes.
Thank you. Moving on to new business. We'll now have a public hearing for major site design plan review by 101 Annapolis MRE and 103 Annapolis MRE property owners for the proposed redevelopment subject property with a new 8,000 gross square foot 2-story mixed-use building containing approximately 3,700 square foot of commercial space on the first floor and 4 residential units above as required, as well as required off-street parking with the vehicular access from Gittings Avenue on property located at 101-103 Annapolis Street. This is also an e-tracket for anyone that wants to go on to the Planning and Zoning Department's webpage, look up for the Planning Commission, and you will also be able to go to our agenda and find that e-tracket link is the easiest place to find it and get all the documentation that we have for the 101 to 103 plan review application. All right, now that public hearing is going to begin. Let's start off with the presentation from staff as normal, and then we'll follow that with the presentation from the applicant, and then going on to public comment. And we did receive quite a few public comments in by noon today with regards to this development, and we will list those names of those people. Matter of fact, so we don't have to wait, I will go ahead and list the names of the public comment that we received already. And those names, let's see if we can get this out. There we go. We have Dan Sandel, Frederick Depew, James Nolan, John Rosso Jr., Patricia Meinhold, Ryan Brissell, and Trudy McFall. And that is 7 in total. Is there any others that anyone knows of is received in the planning department? That's all I have is those 7 by the noon today. Okay.
That is all the comments that we've received.
Thank you very much. And it's good to get those names out there. And everyone else, hopefully you have seen those. If you haven't, you go on eTrack and download those. There's also been sent to you by Kevin Scott and the gang from Planning and Zoning. If we look good, go ahead. And how about the staff proposal?
Okay, Mr. Chair, you're still sharing the screen from the previous item?
There you go.
Yeah. All right, so you read the description, SDP 2020-001. It's a major site design plan review to redevelop the site that's at the corner of Annapolis Street and Gittings Avenue. There's currently 2 buildings that are currently a combination of retail, office, and residential uses. And the proposed use will have commercial space on the ground floor in accordance with the B1 zoning district, and the second floor will be 4 residential apartments. They'll have parking to support the uses as required by code that will come in off of Gittings Avenue. There'll be no vehicular access from Annapolis Street. This major site design has been through agency review from all the city agencies and has been found to comply with the code regulations, and it's not subject to APF, and it's not subject to forest conservation, and it's not in the critical area, and they're not asking for any variances or special exceptions. So that's the long and short of it. I would turn it over to the applicant to give a more detailed presentation.
And for the public, the reason why the Planning Commission is able to see this, the reason why it's coming to us. Basic question for the public notification.
Oh, the reason why the code requires that major site designs are to be approved by the Planning Commission.
Very much. And I also want to point out before this, before the presentation by the applicant, right down the street, we had just approved 105, 106, I think is the correct address on Annapolis Street.
106, 108.
What was it again?
106, 108.
106, 108. I'm sorry, I've got my numbers mixed up. Thank you very much. 106, 108, just down the street for redevelopment. So for anyone from the public, what we're seeing here is a wonderful, in my opinion, developmental opportunity for Annapolis Street in West Annapolis. And this is really a lot going on over there. So members of the public in West Annapolis, let's hope they're keeping their ears on. And if you have any other friends in West Annapolis, please let them know about the Planning Commission meeting and get them to show up at the next one, because this same item will be brought up again at the next meeting. And you have time to comment in between now and the next meeting. So that's all I have from the Planning and Zoning Department. Any other things for your presentation, or is that it?
No, the applicant might bring it up, but they, spoiler alert, there's going to be another application by them on the adjacent property, probably at the December meeting, so.
I have a procedural question. And I guess this is for anybody who wants to field it, whether we want to hold questions till after the presentation by the applicant, or do you want to do those in line if they're just or only in line if they're just clarification and not like going to spur a whole discussion, or just so we're all sort of level set on how this is going to go.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, in the past, we had the recent past, we had gone as we go through it. But in the past before that, we had waited till the end, because sometimes questions we get answered as we go through. So for efficiency's sake, Alex, my opinion is that we hold questions to the end, because sometimes those questions might get answered during the middle. I think this is great that you're bringing this up. Anyone else?
How about just maybe, a quick question, if it's just a quick clarification, but not a, I know that's a judgment, but, and I think, Ben, you could, if it goes longer than a quick clarification, you could shut it off.
All right. I think that's an excellent way to go with this procedure here, since it's variable. Anyone else, any other commissioners have any opinions on that? All right. Okay, well, that's how we'll do it. We'll save all of our major questions to the end. Any quick clarifications, feel free to ask those in the middle. And we'll go ahead and proceed with the applicant's presentation. And for members of the public, it'll be applicant's presentation, then commissioners asking questions of the applicant for clarification. Then after that, we go into the public comment phase, which will begin at that point, which will be late tonight. All right, the lead applicant, briefer, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Stephen Hyatt for the applicant. Address 200 Westgate Circle, Suite 500. On behalf of 101 Annapolis Street MRE LLC and 103 Annapolis Street MRE LLC, collectively the applicant. Quick note, in the recent past for the 106-108 Annapolis Street project you referenced, there was a request that we go through our presentation with a little more haste. So, we've taken that into consideration. We will move through expeditiously and with intention, but we do have to address certain criteria in the code applicable to the commission's review for this major site design plan and to establish the record in this matter. But we have taken your previous comments into consideration.
Thank
With
you.
that, we have the affidavits of posting and the affidavit of mailing notice, just for the record. I believe those need to be admitted as exhibits. Is that something that you just want to give me a number on, 1 and 2?
Are they included in your notebook, Mr. Hyatt, or were they, are they separate?
They were sent to Kevin Scott separately.
Okay.
I've received them separately. They're not in the notebook of the tab notebook, so we have them here in our file.
Okay, so he's requesting that they become part of the exhibit record. So if that's the case, then it would be A10, I believe, and A11.
Okay, thank you. Great. Well, as you heard before from Mr. Scott, this is a major site design plan redevelopment project, again, in the heart of West Annapolis neighborhood. And the applicant has assembled, again, a qualified team of professional architects and engineers, a landscape architect and myself included, to make sure we've complied with the city code. And what we're doing here enhances the West Annapolis community from an environmental, aesthetic, social, and economic perspective, while also being cognizant of maintaining compatibility with surrounding properties. We've had continuous engagement and dialogue with the community, the Department of Planning and Zoning, throughout the design process, and have directly considered input into this version of the project before you this evening. The overall project is Zone B1, Community Shopping District. It's going to replace two dated, relatively functionally limited buildings with a single two-story mixed-use building. It's going to be approximately 8,100 gross square feet. We have just under 4,200 gross square feet on the first floor, which will be made up of commercial retail space, of uses undetermined but allowed in the B1 zoning district. And on the second floor, which is also just under 4,000 square feet, there will be 4 rental apartments. The project has frontage along both Annapolis Street and Gittings Avenue. It fits nicely within the character and the harmony of the surrounding neighborhood, as well as the comprehensive plan. And you'll note, similar to 106, 108, that the West Annapolis area is designated as an opportunity area in the comprehensive plan, and this fits within the policies and goals of that opportunity area. The project maximizes safety, efficiency, and attractiveness, and you'll hear more about that in greater detail from our professionals momentarily. Any concerns about the specific uses, which again aren't identified, will be adequately addressed by the applicant or potential tenants during permitting or special exception process, as the case may be. There is adequate off-street parking with ADA accessibility, and that's provided at the rear of the property off of Gittings Avenue. That will serve as the vehicular access point. There is safe and efficient pedestrian access throughout the property and throughout the parking areas, the drive aisles and sidewalks, building entrances as well. There is bike access and storage, and the proposed landscape plan, which you will hear in great detail momentarily, meets the requirements of the City of Annapolis Landscape Manual. Open space area on the property will be enhanced with landscape improvements. Stormwater management has also been designed in such a way as to eliminate any adverse impact on receiving waters, including other measures utilizing permeable pavement materials and ample plantings, including trees and shrubs, resulting in compliance with all stormwater management requirements. As you will soon hear, this project fully complies with and satisfies the site design standards of Chapter 2162 and all other applicable chapters of the City Code. And with that brief introduction, I would like to introduce E.J. Rumpke. He's a principal with the applicant to share some background information on his vision for this project.
Thank you,
EJ,
Stephen.
if you would state your name and indicate your business, please.
Sure, absolutely. My name is E.J. Rumpke, principal with MRE Properties. Our principal address is 706 Gittings Avenue, Suite 400. We are located right up the street from this project. Just want to start, thanks everybody for their time tonight. We are excited about this development. As everyone sort of mentioned, we have 106, 108 Annapolis Street that we're finalizing the permit process now with the city. And this project is very similar in terms of its size and structure, where we're seeking to build some ground floor commercial space with apartments above it. So we got involved with these two properties in May of 2017. We purchased what used to be the Morgan Gerard hair salon, and then the property next door to it. So the salon was building 1, and then the property next door is 103 Annapolis Street. The owners of the salon actually own both properties, so we purchased them the same day from these guys. The salon did a 2-year lease back on the space, so those guys were there until the spring or summertime of around 2019. At that point, they decided they did not want to stay in the space anymore, so that's when we started to embark on figuring out how to redevelop these two properties. So currently we have a tenant in both of the buildings, 3 different tenants. At 103 Annapolis Street, we have an architecture firm on the first floor, and then we have a residential tenant above. And then at 101 Annapolis Street, we have Revival, which is a home goods store that we're looking for another spot in the neighborhood for them. What you guys see in front of you here is a site location across, this is Annapolis Street, just shows you the other buildings in the neighborhood, and we're off on the left-hand side over here. Yep. And then this is going to be looking probably from Evelyn's is where this picture is taken. So you've got the corner of Gittings and Annapolis Street right here, which we think is really an anchor corner for the neighborhood. And what we're proposing, we think, is going to be a beautiful project and a great sort of meeting and gathering place for a lot of residents and visitors to the community. This is going to be looking from the Macron building across the street and looking at 101 Annapolis Street right here. A little bit further up the street along Gittings, just taking a look back. And then this is a view of 103 Annapolis Street, the property where we have the architecture firm on the first floor and then a residential renter above. And then this is the view from the back of 103 Annapolis Street, looking towards Annapolis Street, probably right next to the Dan Sandals medical office building, his surgery center right here. And then with that, I'm going to hand it off to probably Stephen, who's then going to bring Terry Schumann to the table and walk you guys through the site plan that we have for this.
Thank you, EJ. Do we have Terry? Are you there?
You see me and hear me?
Got you. Yes, sir. Well, Terry, with that, please state your name and occupation for the record.
First, good evening. Good evening, everybody. My name is Terry Schumann. I'm a principal with Bay Engineering Incorporated. Our address is 2661 Riva Road, Building 800, Annapolis, Maryland. Go ahead, Stephen.
Yep. So you want to go ahead and give us a background, briefly explain your experience in the field of civil engineering?
I've got over 35 years of experience, 30 years in the Annapolis area. Very familiar with the city of Annapolis and the surrounding areas.
Great. I've submitted your CV resume in the binder exhibit. Could we get an exhibit number on that?
I'm sorry, it's as you have noted in the binder.
Okay, great, perfect. Then I won't keep asking. Apologies for that. Thank you.
No worries.
Okay. And Mr. Schumann, you've previously testified before this commission.
I have.
In the past?
Yes.
And you're familiar with the property and the project before the commission this evening?
I am. We prepared the base surveys for this project and also the civil plans that were associated with the site development plan.
And you physically visited the site and the surrounding neighborhood?
I have.
And obviously familiar with the city code requirements applicable to the pending application?
I am, yes.
Could you go through and explain how this project meets the applicable requirements for stormwater management?
Yeah, I guess this site's a 16,000 square foot lot. It's basically 160 foot, it's a rectangle, 160 foot by 100 foot wide. Currently the site has you can see this, so this view that you see up there, aerial views, on the left side is just the existing conditions, and then we overlaid the proposed layout on it. So the existing conditions show this site at about 78% impervious. Anything over 40% impervious that we consider it a redevelopment for stormwater management purposes. So we have to treat 75% of the existing impervious area, and then we have to treat 125% for any new impervious area for this development. As I said before, our existing impervious was 78%. The proposed impervious did increase the impervious area a little bit by 559 square feet, up to a total of 81%. But of that 13,000 square foot proposed impervious, 20% of it will be pervious pavement. I think, go to the next slide, please. So in order to treat our, and again, this is, you see Annapolis Street on the top and Gittings Avenue on the right-hand side. We have, to provide stormwater management treatment for the site, we're providing 2 microbiome areas. One, right, that'll serve pretty much the roof runoff. And then the other one right next to it serves part of the paved area. So 2 microbiome areas. And the remaining stormwater management facilities are going to be made up of alternative paving surfaces. So all our parking lots or parking surfaces for the cars will be permeable pavement or permeable pavers. And those devices right there will meet all the requirements for the state and the city.
Great. I'll just ask you, the proposed stormwater facilities, they do in fact satisfy the stormwater regulations for both MDE and the city?
They do.
And are there any particular constraints on the site you need to be aware of?
There are not. I mean, as far as utilities go, we have 6-inch water out in Gittings Avenue. We'll be connecting the Gittings Avenue to serve water, and then sewer line, there's an 8-inch sewer line in Annapolis Street that will continue to serve this proposed development. I would like, can I just point out one thing that I forgot to say on stormwater? I think it's worth noting. The current site has no stormwater management. So with the redevelopment, we'll be providing stormwater management where none exists today.
And what year was the current site's stormwater management built?
No, the current site has no stormwater management.
I'm sorry, the current site, when was it last majorly developed? Roughly 70s or 80s?
I don't actually know the date of when it was when they were constructed. I would venture to say you're probably close, but maybe EJ can answer that.
We'll get back to you on that, Mr. Chairman.
But other than that, no adverse, no particular constraints on the site.
Great.
Mr. Schuman, there was a lot of back and forth between you and the stormwater management expert, Mr. Waters, in Department of Public Works. Are there any outstanding issues between the two of you?
There are not.
Okay.
We satisfied all of them. I think most of the concerns really with the city were trying to minimize our stormwater structures on site and how we tied into the city storm drains. So they were just trying to minimize any structures and pipes. So that was pretty much the bulk of the stormwater questions we got.
I have a quick question, Terry.
Yes.
So it sounds like you're treating all of the existing impervious at 75% and then the additional impervious at 125, is that right?
That's correct.
So I was just reading David Gerald's January 25th, 2019 memo on our new stormwater practices. And it went a little bit further, as you know, than the resolution on stormwater. And it says, when higher levels of treatment are practicable on redevelopment applications, increased treatment shall be implemented with the goal of 100%. So I'm just wondering, have you been able to work on that to maybe get to 100%? Because as you know, we've got major dollars to spend in our WIP to deal with stormwater runoff into our creeks. So we're really encouraging people to follow David Gerald's policy here.
I believe where a site had, look at the site had 78% impervious with no stormwater management. And I believe the state requirements were 50%. The city went off to 75% as far as requirement goes. we've done everything we can to meet the requirements of the city and state here. I believe it's
The only reason I'm saying that is because there may be, opportunities in terms of green roofs and other structures. No, I understand that the state has a different standard, but because we have impaired creeks, we have the ability and the discretion to require more. And we're really, really strongly encouraging developers to meet the goals stated in then Director of Department of Public Works, David Gerald's policy. And I know the extra 25% might be a little bit inconvenient, but there probably are possibilities, whether it's green roof or other small tweaks you can make to get to 100%. I'm just wondering if that's something we can work on.
Yeah, again, I think we've done about the best we can, and I think we've again, a site that has no stormwater management, we're providing stormwater management, going above and beyond the state requirement.
No, we get that there's no stormwater management. That's why it's redevelopment, right? We understand redevelopment, but that's part of what, basically what's left in the city is redevelopment. So what we're trying to do is take advantage in these situations of really trying to catch up, because we've got to reduce a major amount of impervious surface to meet our TMDL goals. And these are the only type of opportunities we have to do it. So that's why David Gerald took the time to go further than our current stormwater regulations to implement. So.
No, understood. But, we also, in order to redevelop these properties, we have to make it financially possible as well. And there's a balancing act, I'm sure. And, we're trying to redevelop a blighted project here and do a nice project in West Annapolis, and still meet the city requirements and still make it financially feasible. So I think all those.
So the answer is no. That's pretty much.
Well, that's correct. The answer is no.
What's going on in the lower left-hand corner? What's that corner doing?
Transformers and there's a transformer there and landscaping.
And what effect do you think that the two major trees had on reducing the first inch of rain and the effects of the first inch of rain? Because I understand that those trees are being removed. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Those are fairly mature trees?
They are, Mr. Waldman, if I may. We'll get into all the details of the trees and the landscape plan with our landscape architect. He's done extensive research and has prepared responses to address that.
I'll wait. Thanks.
Thank you. Yep. Mr. Schuman, I'll pick up with a couple more questions for you.
Sure.
Are there any unique sensitive natural features on the site, such as steep slopes that the design has to accommodate?
There were none, no.
There was a bit of a topography change, is there?
No, we do it. There is if you go to the upper left, that's sort of the high point, and it does slope around the street to the bottom right, about 5-foot elevation difference. And you can see, where you enter in level with the building up on the upper right-hand corner, we do, as we step around the building, it does slope down, and there's steps that access from the street sidewalks. So we've worked with the topography and but nothing adverse.
Are there any scenic, historic, archaeological, or landmark sites implicated by this project?
No, there are not.
Are the proposed building location, open space, landscape elements, pedestrian and vehicular access all adequate, safe, and efficient in your opinion?
They are, yes.
And have all adverse impacts been minimized?
We believe they have. Yes, I do.
And is the proposed building compatible with existing and proposed developments on adjacent properties?
I do believe they are compatible, yes.
Would you mind going through the parking design and how it's going to connect to the public street and right of way?
Yes, so generally that corner lot did access off originally off of Gittings Avenue, and we had made some slight improvements to that, but the location is generally the same across from the Macron access point, and we'll the parking lot and drive will all be accessed off of Gittings Avenue, and the building pedestrian access points will be off of Annapolis Street. 18 spaces are required and 18 spaces have been provided. And I would like to point out too that we do have a bike rack up there along Gittings Avenue, right in that area right there, as well as meeting the requirements for bike parking.
Great. So in conclusion, does this project comply with all applicable standards and in your professional opinion merit approval?
I believe it does, yes.
And just to reiterate briefly, in terms of stormwater, you've met the city and state's requirements and maximize the amount you can do based on the site design and building design as it has been presented to the commission.
Yes, I believe it does, yes. Not I believe it does meet it.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I have no further questions for Mr. Schuman. Shall I move on to my next witness?
Absolutely, because we can always come back to Mr. Schuman later as people develop questions. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next, I'd call Kevin Campion. Do we have Kevin?
Good evening.
Hi, Kevin.
Hi.
Please state your name, occupation, and business address for the record.
Kevin Campion, landscape architect. I'm an owner of Campion Ruby Landscape Architects, 111 Cathedral Street, Suite 100, Annapolis, Maryland.
Thank you. Could you give us a brief background on your experience in the field of landscape architecture?
I've been practicing landscape architecture for 22 years in the city of Annapolis. I've done extensive projects in the city, as well as in the greater Mid-Atlantic region.
Great, thank you. And for the record, we have submitted a copy of Kevin's resume with our packet. It'll be Exhibit 9. Mr. Campion, have you previously testified before this commission?
I have.
And are you familiar with the project and the property at issue this evening?
Yes, I've been there several times.
Okay, so you have visited the site, great. And you're familiar with the city code requirements and landscape manual requirements?
I am.
Go ahead and explain for us and the commission how you design the landscaping and planting plans associated with this project, please.
Well, this is not a landscape. This is a smaller project. It's got, instead of having one large garden, we've developed the garden in several small pockets, each pocket coming together with the same similar plant material to create a common gesture. I think this garden is a colorful and a refreshing addition to the West Annapolis landscape. I think it really will make this corner pop. We're adding street trees to the corner of the on both Annapolis and Gittings. We're planting some larger oaks and maples in the rear of the property. We're fully planting the bioretention areas with native thriving grasses and perennials.
Can I ask that you change your cursor so the people out here can see a little bit better when you get a chance? Please proceed.
And then lastly, we've developed these planters along the corner of Annapolis Street and Gittings as the raised planters that will be easier to maintain and less likely to be trampled. These planters will be filled with native plants, lots of grasses and perennials. Again, like adding this pop to the corner of Annapolis and Gittings. This garden is, like I said, fairly simple. We wanted it to be safe. There's clear lines of sight between areas. And it's also going to be easier to maintain. We have, like I said, raised planters and lots of native plants that will affect their own maintenance. And stormwater areas that are going to look beautiful as well as functional.
Does the landscape plan as designed satisfy the city code site design standards including those for plantings and trees?
Yes, it adheres to all the standards. In regards to the trees, based through the mitigation table in 1709-060, we are fulfilling the requirement for trees. We're actually planting 3 times as many trees that are required. Our trees are gonna all be in soil pits that are larger than 400 cubic feet of volume that's required, much larger, and kind of in a better position than some of the existing trees on site. As we mentioned earlier, we had to think about, there aren't many trees on this site, really, but there are 2 trees that are of significant size, but also aging. We don't like to remove trees that are larger, but larger doesn't always mean healthy. And unfortunately, some of these trees had fatal flaws. I'd like to just explain that a little bit. I know there'll be some questions about that. We had a certified arborist from Bartlett, Tyler Balderson, look at these trees through the planning stages. We've had several conversations with him about the trees. One of the trees is a pin oak. And pin oaks in general are very highly sensitive to construction. This pin oak looks to have bacterial leaf scorch. Here's some pictures of the trees as I talk about them. We've sent away the samples for bacterial leaf scorch. We're waiting on results. That's a kind of a slow disease that affects oaks in this area, but it's eventually can be terminal. The other tree is a chestnut oak in front of on Annapolis Street, further up Annapolis Street. Unfortunately, chestnut oaks are super sensitive to construction as well. We've had I know many of you know, we've had a loss of chestnut oaks throughout the area over the last year or 2. I had a large one taken down in my house. Unfortunately, they're very sensitive to environmental changes. Last year we had a lot of rain and then a drought, and it just killed a bunch of chestnut oaks. And like the subtle changes in construction, and hydrology will have an impact on these trees. We determined that both of these trees have overextending limbs in power lines that have been heavily pruned. The pin oak in particular is now sort of leaning over the Morgan Gerard building. It has a co-dominant leader that is kind of leaning over the building, and there's nothing on the other side to balance it. Both trees are growing in very small spaces, specifically right next to asphalt driveways. They're actually growing into the driveway, which is problematic. These roots are now intertwined with the pavement. When you take the pavement away, in our experience, it has really complicated issues with the trees. You can see in this picture, the trees are in the power lines. You can see how they've been pruned to stay out of the power lines. There's a concrete wall. I think in the next picture, it shows a concrete wall. Here's some of the tree roots just are growing into the pavement. There's a concrete wall that's basically, the tree has married itself with the concrete wall, the pin oak. It's now part of the root system. So removal of that will be very dangerous and cause damage. So for all of these reasons, you can see that here's the co-dominant leader on the left, kind of leaning over Morgan Gerard. A lot of the limbs on the right have been pruned away. So, we don't feel like, in talking with the arborists, we didn't feel like these were great candidates for tree preservation. We know unfortunately from previous experiences that development has, these trees don't always survive. They often, oaks in general often have a lot of trouble in construction. We feel like just taking out the asphalt driveways and deconstruction, these trees may not even survive that. We recently had a project on Gittings, right down the road. We had a large oak that we preserved through construction, spent a ton of money on the tree, and it died within a year of the project being finished, despite all efforts to save it. Based on all of this information, it was just determined to follow the code and mitigate for these trees with a 3-to-1 ratio, and then plant a mixed variety of hardwood trees and trees that will create a a large, safe canopy over, for the future, kind of investing in the future. Each of these trees will have ample soil to grow in the future. This development, this design will not create a situation. They're not planted too close to anything. It's not going to create a situation like we have now. So it's kind of stewardship for the future. I just wanted to explain how we thought long and hard about this, and we've been looking at all angles.
Can you name the type of 3-to-1 trees that you're going to use? Can you actually say those types now, or you don't know?
Yeah, so we're using in bioretention areas, we're using fringe tree, which is a native tree that lives in the wet. We're also using a river birch in the bioretention. In other areas, we're using red maples, white oak, and flowering cherries.
Okay, so the red maple and white oak can grow fairly large. The other two sound like lesser growing trees.
Well, the tree we thought about that. The trees along Gittings and Annapolis Street are like within the power line area again. So we wanted to make sure that we don't create the same situation that happened now, where you get a tree that it looks lovely in the first few years, and then it starts to grow, and then the utility company comes and trims it, and it just doesn't look good anymore. So we thought about the placement of the trees as well.
Yeah, I get that. And there's no power lines on Gittings. It's just on Annapolis Street that I see. But I understand that it's 3-to-1. So you're planning on removing those 2 big trees and replacing them with 6 mid-sized to smaller trees, I would say, right?
A few big trees as well.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Mr. Campion, let's start with the maples in the back. How high and how wide do they grow at maturity?
Oh, at maturity, they can grow to 80 feet tall, maybe 40 feet wide. They're a wide species. They will create canopy for sure.
And how closely are they planted here in the plan?
They're planted about 20 to 25 feet on center.
And they can arrive at a diameter of how much?
Well, the trees grow based on the circumstances that they're in. So they, in a field all by itself, these trees could grow, like I said, 80 feet tall. But they live within the situation that's given them. So these trees, with the spacing they have, they might grow to 40 or 50 feet tall, 60 feet tall over time. They're long-lived trees, but they're going to adapt to their circumstances.
With the diameters of what do you expect the diameters to be then?
Like I said, every tree is different, and the diameter will be affected by the amount of soil it has to grow in. So these maples could grow in this situation to 30 or 40 feet in diameter. They'll eventually grow together and create a larger canopy.
Is that your intention for them to grow together?
In a perfect world, we could grow, you would grow them to create their own unique specimen form. But in urban situations, we're trying to create more canopy for lots of positive reasons. But we're trying to, as you can see, we spread these trees throughout the site as much as we could.
Excuse me for interrupting. I want to stay focused on the red maples in the back. So is it your intention that they actually grow together? That they will actually basically grow into each other?
No, it is my intention that they grow in a beautiful line, and the trunks will be clearly identifiable and beautiful, and the canopies themselves will probably eventually, over a long period of time, grow to, yes, some of the branches may grow into each other.
But you say under decent circumstances, they'll grow to a 40-foot diameter. That's 20-foot radii. Is that correct? I'm harkening back to my earlier geometry, but a 40-foot diameter is a 20-foot radius. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah.
And you've got 20 feet just between each tree, right? That's a 10-foot radius for each tree.
Yeah, these trees will, like I said, they will grow based on their the soil that's given them, and they will adapt, and they will fill this space and create a canopy over the parking area.
Well, what I'm concerned about, I understand the goals, but what I'm concerned about is that they're planted too close together. What do you think of that? I mean, is it, I can see them looking nice for 10 or 15 years and then they're weak because they're too tight.
We are trying to create the best balance, strike the best balance between fulfilling a requirement and providing canopy tree coverage to reduce urban heat index. It's a balance when you work in urban conditions. You don't always have the perfect scenario, but you find robust trees that are native and have a lot of habitat value, and you create the best situation you can.
Okay, well, I'm going to tell you my concerns with the red maples, that they're fairly soft, and they don't have the super long life. Is that they're pretty close together, and it occurs to me that if there were a variety of trees, some of them narrower, you've got 5 trees here, numbers 1 through 4. Pardon me.
Right.
And if the intervening tube in the center, or some combination of different types with less of a diameter and more of an ability to flourish under the larger canopies of the 2 larger trees at the end, might, in the longest run, because we're thinking of the longest run here, might be better than just a row of red maples, which might all die at the same time. So that's a suggestion that I have. I can't your resume certainly outshines mine in terms of trees, but that occurs to me that you've got trees that are planted too closely together.
I think this team is certainly willing to
retreat closely together in the back. Now, turning my attention to the front, you've got 3 ornamental cherry trees. And what's the height that cherry trees grow to?
So they will grow certainly lower. They're a mid-sized tree, probably about 25 feet, 30 feet.
Where are the power lines? What point would a tree reach the pruning necessities by BG&E?
Oh, it's so
higher.
It'll take a while. They're slower growing, and they're not going to sprout. They're not a tree that grows vertical. They kind of grow wider as they get older. We think that's the right tree for kind of a mid-size, good aesthetic value, really good interest, strong interest, but doesn't grow too fast, too quickly.
So you got 3 ornamental cherries in boxes in the front.
Bob, I'll say it's 25 feet to the cable telephone lines at the bottom of your line structure.
And that's about what they'll grow to. One of the things that they're planted in these boxes. Have you given in consideration to that system of interlocking? I don't know what you'd call them.
The cells?
Under pavement boxes that allow tree roots to grow pretty much at liberty underneath and reach to the sides rather than being confined to these boxes. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. We sized these, we calculated the size, and they kind of exceeded the requirement. So we can look into that.
Well,
Bob, do you mean silver cells that
Jim Urban developed?
That Jim Urban developed, exactly.
Yes, if that's what they're called. Mr. Campion, what do you have to say to that?
Oh, I certainly know of silver cells. Well, we use them. I do think the trees have enough soil volume. They're not in small squares. There's a lot of soil underneath them. We calculated that. We can look into the possibility of creating some soil trenches to improve long-term viability.
Bob, I like your idea because one of the things that silva cells do is that they actually capture more stormwater. That's part of what they do. One of the things that's great about them. So they add more stormwater filtration capacity. So I think that's a good recommendation. Is there a chance to look into that, Kevin?
Well, I mean, you're going to be basically excavating this entire property, at least in the front there, right? I mean, all of that's going to be new construction all the way up to the curb. Okay, and the technical term is, are they called soil trenches or are they called silva cells?
So you can create a soil trench and use a structural soil and connect areas just under pavement, just basically creating a bridge under pavement of uncompacted soil. You can use silva cells are one method to do that. Yes.
Okay, but what's the general technique called?
Soil trenching.
What's it called?
I'm just using the term soil trenching, but silva cells is a specific product that is it's a space frame unit that allows the soil within it to be uncompacted and allows tree roots to grow through it.
So you would be able to create a soil environment of uncompacted soil. Is that the way? Is that?
Yeah, and I think the area where it may be applicable is just between the three cherries on Annapolis Street. Everywhere else, it's not a good application for that, but just underneath those two paving areas, so that all three trees have a connected trench, is a.
That's exactly what I'm talking about, and only what I'm talking about now. Okay, I think I'm clear. If I could continue to move around in a counterclockwise fashion, there's a whole row of some form of evergreens behind the parking spaces.
That's right.
Why are there evergreens? What kind of evergreens? And would some mixture of deciduous evergreen? Tell me what your thinking is on that, because it looks like a very formal row of soldiers at attention.
So this is a parking lot. You know, it's a row of hollies to, you know, for the sake of the neighbors, so that they're not looking at a parking lot full of cars. You know, it's a tight space. You know, we thought a simple row of evergreens would create some visual calming from surrounding properties.
So it's a row of columnar hollies of some sort?
That's correct.
And what are their spreads? I mean, what do they grow into?
So they are, I mean, it's all relative. These are, every tree has a different growth habit and rate. Hollies happen to grow slowly, very slowly. So, the trees will grow. You know, these trees will grow together eventually. But again, they're very slow growing trees.
Okay. What's the water flow like into that row of trees? Do you know what the hydrology is like?
The areas will have natural rainfall. They'll have augmented with irrigation.
Augmented irrigation?
Yeah, those hollies happen to be on the uphill side of the site. They will be irrigated, and they will also get natural rainfall. Our intention is to do what we can to keep them alive and help them to thrive.
Okay, I'm just skeptical of the short lives of irrigation systems, and that if one can pursue natural flow of water, natural hydration, that really is our best bet in the long run, and probably cheaper than installing irrigation systems. I mean, what if anything can be done on the border of that property to ensure that they actually get natural flow of rainwaters?
Well, so it's at the top of the site. So I think the natural flow is flowing away from that area. Our goal is to get these trees established, help them to get started, and then whether they're irrigated or not, the first year is the most important time for the watering of a tree and the establishment of a tree. And after that point, these trees would probably be fine on their own.
What's up above them? Is there a wall above them? Like
Yes,
there's
there's a wall. I don't know if there's a picture. Do we have a picture of that area on the like existing?
Is that wall? Is that wall?
Go to the existing aerial.
Is that wall yours or the next door neighbors?
That is a wall on our property.
And
it's holding back grade. There's a let's see. Yeah, there's the wall.
It's on the right-hand side, right?
Yeah, that's right. You can see the
or on the
walls on the
left-hand
left-hand side.
On the left-hand side.
That's correct.
And that's your wall?
Yes, and so we can't control anything that happens above the wall. We can clean up the wall and improve this wall, but hydrology, this is the uphill side of the site.
So you're not getting any water from uphill.
Correct.
No,
that's what I'm
the
trying
wall
to
is
say.
the wall is holding it all back.
That's right. So we have to establish these trees and get the roots to grow and thrive in the new soil, and then they will grow on their own, and we will make sure that they are thriving through either natural rainfall or augmentation.
Okay, I have two questions about that. Does it make any sense to think about putting some sort of drain holes through that wall to allow groundwater to come through and actually water these trees? That's my first question. My second question has to do with what kind of soils you've specified, how deep and what the volume is to ensure that they're not just plunked down into some lousy Annapolis sandy soil.
So we've done this a lot. We've done hundreds of these projects. We're not at the point in the project where we specify the soil, but I can promise you that we will be taking soil samples. We will be augmenting all the soils with amendments to improve the tilth of the soil. There will be drainage behind this wall. I'm sure there is drainage behind this wall. Otherwise it would collapse. So, with hydrostatic pressure, but above the wall is not our property. So, I don't think we can dig there. I think we're going to do everything we can to water these trees, amend the soil, give them the best chance to thrive.
Well, okay, those are reassurances. My first question was, does it make sense to even just consider boring holes through that wall simply to allow some of that subsurface ground flow to come through? Because I don't have much faith in irrigation systems. They don't last. They're not maintained. Somebody cuts them and they're done with. So I'm trying to think of some.
Yeah, let's take on your recommendation to study the wall to see if we can improve the drainage through the wall to help water the trees. I'm happy to look at that.
Okay, Bob, you done?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sale. I'm done.
Thank you.
All right. Alex Klein, you're going to hate me because I think what we're going through here is asking the questions as we go through with each person rather than waiting to the end. So since we've done that, and it seems to be the most efficient way, in my opinion, I'm going to make this a minute and a half or less. My quick viewpoint of your plan for greenery, I'm sorry, it's just layman's terms at the moment. The existing two properties have huge trees and a lot of green grass on the front. So there's green grass on Annapolis Street on the right of our screen here with the existing property. On the right and on the bottom of your screen, there's a lot of green grass. And I know we don't have a current picture displayed, but if you went to the back of the building on the left side of your screen, the existing property is mostly, it's not green back there. So the hardest thing for me, and I think anybody in this neighborhood who knows that property, is going to be what you're doing. You're taking most of the green, which people are used to seeing on the right bottom of your screen here, and putting it in the back. You are adding some, you're putting in trees in the front. That's great. but that's going to be the hardest pill to swallow because it is a lot of beautiful grass on Annapolis and Gittings on the right of the screen and the bottom of the screen, which we're not going to have. And you're going to have this patio concrete type feel and a lot less greenery up there. And it almost, to me, it's like, man, that impervious surface of grass is being traded for pavements, pavers in the back in the parking lot.
Yeah, I think if you took
hold on real quick. So for me, knowing this property, being in West Annapolis quite a bit, I like your small trees because they make sense with the power lines. We deal with that in the Homewood Germantown neighborhood for cutting. I get it with the cherry trees. On the last drawing, I did not see a tree at the bottom right corner. On the bottom right of your screen, that one was not displayed on the previous one. I think we can get somehow, we can make you or get you to put more trees on Annapolis Street at that corner of Annapolis and Gittings or on Annapolis Street, because I only saw 3 cherry trees in the previous, and I think there could be more. We're talking 2 properties, and to only see 3 cherry trees on Annapolis Street when there's 2 properties, to me, that means there's not enough. So what's your comments on that, Mr. Campion?
Well, to the first comment, I think if the existing building went through the planning process now, you'd have to quadruple the parking. There's not many parking spaces at the existing building. So, this is just a function of the current planning process that, sometimes the green space is traded off for parking. So, we're trying to create a balance of that, incorporating the necessary requirements for parking, but then, filling everything else, every other space that we can with green. I want to make sure that, we could certainly, this plan that you see has an additional tree on Gittings. I think that creates a balance. Then you have 3 ornamental trees on Gittings and 3 ornamental trees on Annapolis. And then behind that, you fill the stormwater areas with birches, like I said, birch and fringe tree, and you plant some of the larger trees where you have more soil in the back. I think that's a we're planting 3 times as many trees as required, and I think this is a good balance throughout the site.
All right, so what I'm seeing here is different than the previous picture. So what is the design? Is there going to be one at the corner or is there not?
We can add a tree there at the corner. Yeah, I think that was just a mistake.
Just a mistake?
Yeah.
Okay. And in the bottom left, so if you could switch back to the last picture you were displaying about 5 minutes ago. All right, now switch back to your current picture. Okay, so to me, the only one you're missing is that one on the corner.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
And I'll be honest with you, there's a lot of steps coming off of that building to Gittings and a lot of steps coming off to Annapolis Street. Do we really need all those steps, or could we eliminate one of those entrances here or there and actually throw in some more green space, throw in another tree? So I challenge you to add another tree or 2 down there to that right corner. Okay. It's just the thought, and I think it's the way we can get more green. I don't know if you're trying not to hide the building and you want to have more of a building looking out on the street feel. I can understand that.
Well, I do, I think that was a mistake, but I think the corner is a magical place in any development. So I think that corner needs kind of the most attention, and you'll see in the renderings that are coming up from the architects that there's a lot of color and texture and green there. It's
I think it's very inviting corner. It has that overhang, that pavilion type structure over it. Maybe that's a limiting factor for you. So maybe instead of a tree, maybe you get some vertical evergreens or something, but I know you don't want to block it. It's a tough call. I'm just throwing that out there. There just doesn't seem to be enough green there. And this whole design shifts the green from the front to the back and making it more of a cafe open type atmosphere on Apple Street, which is desirable, but it might be a shock to some. That's all that I have. Anyone else?
And yeah, Ben, I just want to mirror what you're saying. The beauty of that street are the beautiful old trees. There are some pin oaks. It's a gorgeous little boulevard. And I think taking those large trees out and supplementing with 3 ornamental trees doesn't do that visual landscape justice. So I would agree that we should have at least 1 or 2 big, some real canopy trees there. And I noticed I'm jumping ahead, but there's some Hammond Wilson depictions of Annapolis Street, and there are no power lines. So perhaps they're putting the power lines below ground, which would solve all these issues. Is that what's happening?
I don't know what BG&E's plan is for putting power lines underground in West Annapolis, but I'm going to guess that it's not anytime soon or probably never. But
do you know, Kevin, because of the depictions of all the streets, the artist renderings from Hammond Wilson have no power lines.
I do not know that answer.
We'll address that when we get to Leo's testimony.
Okay.
Thank you.
So it would be interesting because the landscape architect would certainly know the choice of trees, and maybe those cherries were chosen because if there are going to be power lines, as opposed to what the artist renderings show, that's why you chose cherries. Is that a possibility, Kevin?
Well, they're also very ornamental, beautiful trees. I think they have a good scale to them. They have great color. There's a lot of reasons why we chose them.
Yeah,
But on that street where there are beautiful old trees that are 3 and 4 times higher than that, I'm just wondering, that just change what Ben was saying. I agree with. It just changes the look. It's going to be it's a starker look. It's not as pretty.
Hey, Stephen, this is David Williams. So I am also a principal at MRE. I would just weigh in. We would love nothing more to see those power lines get buried. We've explored it, and there is no interest or momentum in the economics of burying those lines.
Okay.
On whose part? I mean.
And Kevin, I've got one more other thing, and Diane, you might like this one too, is that
Thank you, David.
covered area on the bottom right corner. Is there a chance you can put ivy over that? I mean, it totally would foment that. You know that, what do you call that? It's not a complete cover you from the rain overhang. What do you call that at the bottom right corner of Gittings and Annapolis Street? There's got to be a structural term for that. Trellis.
Arbor. Yeah.
Okay. It's a trellis over your head. Are you guys planning on putting ivy that grows all over that and kind of make it more of a green building?
Yeah, we haven't developed it that far. We haven't developed those final plans. We could consider that, but I think that's a clean corner. There's a lot of places where maybe we can, in the back of the building, for instance, we have some planted trellises that we're trying to green up the architecture. So there are areas where we are encouraging that. I'm not sure if that's the clean look we're looking for in the front.
I like West Annapolis, and I like sitting on corners in West Annapolis. If I'm going to sit right there on a corner in July, I'm going to want some shade overhead. And since we don't have the big trees,
a nice shade tree, yeah.
Right, I guess you're calling it a trellis. You could have ivy growing all over your head. That would be beautiful. So just a thought. All right, I'm done. Anyone else?
Thank you.
I just missed what Mr. Williams said. He said something about no interest in burying the wires. Is that what he said?
Yeah, I mean, so this is, we've had a couple conversations regarding the possibility of those lines ultimately being buried, but those conversations have never gone anywhere. It seems like there's just not an appetite. I would love to see the 2 blocks of Annapolis Street between, to bury those lines and some nice street lights and, these sidewalks are in terrible shape. I mean, Annapolis West Street in its current form is in pretty rough shape, as we all know. So we'd love nothing more to see that.
And so why is there no appetite? You don't think the citizens want that, or the residents?
I don't think the city I don't think the city can afford to do it. And I don't think the owners of those properties can afford to then take the buried lines into their facilities. So it's certainly, it's not something we control.
Wait, so I know that a couple of places recently put up some buildings and they buried some of the utilities. So it's the city that determines that, not the landowner?
Correct. I mean, we don't control the power lines across Annapolis Street.
Right.
So I'd love to hear from Annapolis. Is there somebody on the phone that, if somebody wants to help figure out how to bury all those lines, we'd love it as property owners.
No, that's great, especially because you guys have such a big presence in West Annapolis. You could lead the way if we get the city's, commitment to work with you. So I'm kind of curious about that, because that would absolutely make that West Annapolis more attractive than it already is. So I don't know, Tom, are you still on the phone, on the call? Tom Smith?
Yeah, he's there. I think he might know. I mean, I always thought that that was BGE's. It's
It
not
is.
city power lines, so I don't think the city, but Tom might know better than I do.
Yes, I'm still here.
Go ahead, Tom. Do you know, Art, those BGE lines?
I honestly, I don't know enough about the utilities that are there, if they're owned by BG&E, but typically they are. And that's a quite expensive proposition, putting poles and wires underground. I mean, it's in excess of $100,000 a pole just to relocate one.
But so, David, so you have, I'm just curious because I wonder what would that look like in Eastport? And people keep saying they've done done research, but I've never heard exactly what those conversations are and the real cost. So do you have any input into what burying the BG&E lines cost and how far are you?
Yeah, this is EJ. I'll chime in here. So it usually ends up being multiple parties that have a say in the situation. So the pole will have like a BGE component. It'll have typically a Verizon component, a Comcast component, and then the city may have some streetlights that are a part of it. So you're required to get approval from all 4, 5, 6 different people. And then in terms of the cost to move, Tom was right. Moving one pole at this site would be upwards of $100,000. And that's if you can get approval to do it from all the different people. So taking that into consideration, it's not economically feasible for us to try and endeavor and push towards that with this project.
Yeah, and this is David again, for absolute clarity, moving one pole doesn't help us. The real question is who's in a position to help move all of the poles for 2 blocks of Annapolis Street?
Right.
Without that, we're back to where we are.
Right. No, I understand. I just thought if there was ever going to be a time to start doing this kind of major effort, this might be it, because you guys have such a great presence there. I was just curious. So thanks.
Anyone else for Mr. Kevin Campion?
I actually have another question or two. We got sidetracked with some questions.
Yeah.
So Kevin, thank you for all your explanations there. Certainly learning a lot about trees. In your professional opinion, the proposed landscape plan, obviously considering some of the comments you've heard, is it safe and adequate and efficient and designed to minimize any adverse impacts on the surrounding area and appropriate in terms of both aesthetics and environmental considerations?
Yes, I think it is. I think we're adding diversity in the stormwater management areas. We will take your recommendations to heart and look at some of the tree species. Maybe we can change from a red maple to something else that's similarly native, but we can look into that. I think the landscape is entirely safe now, especially without the risk of possible tree failure.
And then just 2 clarifying points. One thing I wasn't entirely clear on, that was a big line of questioning, the trees being too close together and growing together. The trees themselves, like their trunks, aren't going to actually fuse together. The branches might be intertwined, still creates a canopy. How is that? Is it always going to be detrimental, or could it potentially create more shade, more canopy? What's the end result there?
We in urban situations, we have this issue. You especially with requirements to plant trees. That if we had our druthers, we would space trees out to their perfect natural spacing that they would grow naturally. But in these situations, we often have to sacrifice spacing. But the trees will be trees that are 25 feet apart for decades will be certainly well-spaced, healthy trees growing together. And eventually they'll just create a canopy that is combined. And we find that that's okay. It's not, in urban situations, like I said, it's not always a perfect circumstance.
Great, thank you. And one last point to the chairman's comment about having the open grass in the back. Terry Schumann noted that there's no stormwater management facilities on site. Is it your opinion that as is, the grass is less beneficial than having the stormwater facilities and trees that you're proposing in this plan?
Yeah, for lots of reasons. Grass takes maintenance. It creates, we need to mow it, which has, uses fossil fuels. I'd rather just fill this every inch of this landscape with native ground covers to add diversity and habitat value.
Great, thank you very much. If the commission has no further questions, I proceed to my next witness. Okay, great. Hearing none. Do I have Leo Wilson still with us?
You do.
Great. Leo, go ahead. State your name and occupation and business address for the record, please.
Sure. My name is Leo Wilson. I'm with Hammond Wilson Architects, and our offices are at 430 4th Street over in Eastport.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, give us a little bit of background on your experience in the field of architecture, if you will.
I've been a licensed architect for about 30 years now, and I've been practicing here in Annapolis for most of that time. We work on a variety of projects from residential to commercial, and we've been involved in projects in this city for a long time.
Great, thank you. And there is a copy of your resume and the record in our binder. It's, I believe, Exhibit 7. And you've testified before this commission numerous times, have you not?
I have.
And you're very familiar with the property and the project, and you've visited the property and the surrounding area?
I have and I am.
Great, thank you. Go ahead and tell us how you approach this project from an architectural standpoint, please.
So this is an interesting corner because it really kind of is a crossroads, if you will, between two different areas in West Annapolis. And we often think of West Annapolis as a single element, but if you spend time there, you know that there are portions of that community that are residential in nature, portions that are small businesses, shops, and then there are portions that are larger structures and more commercial with larger office buildings. I wouldn't say big, but I'd say larger than other places in West Annapolis. And so this particular intersection is interesting because it kind of does two things. It faces, the shopping central area on the main street, and then on Gittings, it starts to turn the corner towards a transition, I'll say. So the architecture that we chose for this building was to try and have this building relate successfully to both of those areas and act almost as a transition between the two. The building's set up with its primary face on Annapolis Street, and we think that's appropriate because that seems to be where the primary activity on the street happens. So we structured it so that we would have the primary face there, and of course the architecture relates to the site as well. We also wanted to put the parking in the back to get it away from the main street. So we come around the side and come off of Gittings into the parking area. Ms. Butler mentioned, trying to do more with the green space and, possibly looking at siting options for the building, that type of thing. And as I've testified before or offered testimony before about that issue, parking is a big driver in the city in the code as it sits today. And so we'd all like, I think, to see more green space, but it has to be balanced with the high requirement for parking on these sites. So we've done our best to try and manage those two things as successfully as we can. So in this project, what we've set up is a
Leo, can I interrupt you? So my turn to drag things on here a little bit longer.
Sure.
With respect to, you guys always know I'm going to ask about this, but with respect to parking, I know you meet the requirements by code, and maybe this is a better question for EJ and maybe David, but if you had no minimum parking requirements, how much parking would you put in? Do you feel it's overparked with the requirements? Because it does, it's really unfortunate that half of that lot is parking. And,
well, if you consider, if you consider what you have on the site now and you see the uses around town, I mean, look, we're all familiar with garages that are half empty most of the time, you know, and I see that on many of the sites. So without going too far down the rabbit hole, I think we would all agree that, you know, if the parking requirements weren't so high on these properties, there would be more green space, and I think they are high. And I think you would agree that, you know, the parking requirements in the city are high. And as transportation modalities change, hopefully we'll see those numbers drop and the code will reflect that change.
Right. So, you know, and now I'm thinking also with, Ben, spoiler alert for the project that we're going to get to look at probably next, which is next door. And I've seen some preliminary plans on that, but part of what I'm a little concerned with the way that parking is structured, basically the middle half of that block is going to be parking between this development and the one next to it. And, you know, I understand the requirements there, and that's the law. And as much as some of us might not like them, that's the law at the moment. And, you know, we have to meet that, unfortunately. But it really would be nice if there were a way so that parking is not visible from the street, because, you know, while Annapolis Street really is the main focus of that spot, it really, to me, degrades the value of Gittings Avenue on that block to basically for half of it to be two missing middle teeth, essentially, because there's going to be parking. You know, it would be nice if there could be something there that is nice for people who are walking by, whether it's building or whatever, and have the parking tucked hidden and not visible and sort of degrade the street presence.
So let's go back just a little bit. Andrew, can you go back to the landscape plan for a second? I don't want to get too far down the road here, but what we've done here, Alex.
Hey, Leo, can I this is David Williams. I just want to sort of react to Alex. Alex, I agree with you. I mean, let's just be honest. As a landowner and as a property owner here, you know, the current code requirements just aren't very productive to creating the vision of an urban village, walkable village that everybody wants. We want more trees, we want slightly more density, but, you know, without structured parking, the urban village is a fantasy, because this is what you got to do. And now we can let the Morgan Gerard building is falling apart. So we can just let buildings fall apart, or we can build to code, but the code, you know, to your point, really isn't all that productive right now, unfortunately.
I guess
did you guys consider seeing these two properties together and working the parking, the access, and the tree shading as one cohesive unit, and consider even shared parking and seeking a variance on that code requirement?
They're zoned differently, and it's just it's not that helpful. I mean, it doesn't get us all that much, just because of the way the property next to it's only 50 feet deep, so it's got some real issues associated with it. So of course we did look at it, but on a practical basis, honestly, it doesn't really get you anything.
Well, just as an aside, I think it's unfortunate. I think that you're ahead of the game. One would hope that in the master plan, you're going to see some of those changes so that you would allow both more density, more flexible parking requirements and the like. And I can understand why you're hesitant to wait for the city to get anything done. But I do see that on a 1 to 3 year horizon. But
yeah,
aside from that, we have what we have here tonight. If there are any possibilities of shared parking between these two facilities, it might at least mitigate some of the problems.
Mr. Wald, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, look, we've been waiting 3 years, and, you know, it just from an economic viability perspective, it's just not economically viable for us to wait another 3 years. And, you know, I would love nothing more to see this zoning change in this. We look at the master plan, but that, you know, that's just not the practical reality that we're up against this evening, unfortunately, for all.
But I think what Mr. Waldman said was that in considering this with the development next to it, the ability perhaps to look at those together and apply for a variance with shared parking could be done now.
And I would agree with that. And you've got the group here that are the masters in shared parking, or I don't know how to say this right, but getting around the parking requirements when they want to. If any group can do it, you've got the group right here.
Well, so let's talk about that for just a minute too, because just to back up just a minute. So one of the things that is happening here is that the residential is a driver and the commercial is a big driver for parking spaces, as you know. And you all of anyone know how difficult getting a shared parking agreement in place in this city is. So I'm reluctant to say that, yeah, that's a possibility, keeping in mind that the adjacent structure we're looking at now is residential. So that has a relatively modest demand. But, you know, with the residential and commercial mixed, if the city were, it would be great if they were looking forward a bit more on the shared parking agreements. And I'm hopeful that the comp plan starts to reflect that. Now let's get back to the plan at hand here though for just a minute. One of the things that we've done, and you know, we've done this in other projects, is we looked at how to minimize the vehicular component of the project so that the drive is in a single spot that's safe and controlled, and that the parking's been pushed back away from the sidewalk and pedestrian experience. So what we did was we shifted the parking lot back into the corner and put areas where we could provide landscape elements along the sidewalk. So if you're thinking about the comments we heard about Annapolis Street with the greening of Annapolis Street, you know, we've done what we think is a fairly good job. On the other hand, I'd say on Gittings, if you think about that as kind of a landscape experience, it's pretty strong. The cars are a good distance away from the sidewalk. There's large trees, and the rain gardens are really quite lovely. So I think when you see the renderings, you'll see that those are going to be successful. And the adjacent property, when we bring that in, you'll see a similar approach to how we're handling those things.
Okay.
So with that, can we go to the next slide, Andrew? So as I described the building, what we've got in front of you here is about just over 3,000 square feet of available commercial space. And we've set it up so that it could be subdivided depending on the tenancy. So we've got four kind of bays, if you will, that we've set up so that, you know, if smaller shops come to us as tenants and EJ works out deals with them, then that would be great. If it's a single user, if it's two users, you know, one big and two small, we've made provisions to accommodate that kind of flexibility so the building can stay active and vibrant regardless of the tenant makeup. Go to the next one, Andrew, please. Then on our second floor, we've set it up with 4 apartments here. The apartments range in size, but in general terms are between 8.25 and just over 900 square feet. They're comfortable apartments. Because of the size, we think they'll be at a good price in terms of what we'll be able to get for rents. We've set them up so that they face the front and back to get light back through the units as much as we can. And we varied the components in terms of how the front's handled in the back, which you'll see more of in the next slide. But one thing I wanted to point out, just go back for 1 second, Andrew, is we've set the entrances for the apartments along the backside because we think that will be a pleasant experience there. So we tried to separate the commercial, which faces Annapolis, from the experience for the tenants, which will be in the back. Again, trying to create a more garden-like experience, and we'll look at that next. Go ahead. So the elevations, we didn't spend much time rendering these because they're very flat drawings and these are technical and, you know, it's fine. The information's there. One thing I wanted to point out though is that the height limit in this zone is 35 feet, if I'm correct, and we're about 27.5 feet. So we tried to take into account what we're seeing along the street face on Annapolis Street and react to that in a way that we felt fit the scale and character of the block. We also went to forms for the front that started to repeat what we saw along the block face, particularly in the adjacent structures and those across the street. Next. This is on Gittings Avenue. Again, you can see that we've changed the architecture a little bit here. That gable form continues along the front and then in the back changes to a more contemporary form with some outdoor spaces and the green wall, which we'll see in a minute. And then from the back, this is a very hard drawing to read, so we're just going to pass this. And then this is the side that faces the adjacent property. And again, these are some of the challenges you face in urban architecture. It's somewhat suburban in the sense that these buildings aren't directly attached to each other as a street face would be, but we're not permitted to put a whole lot of openings in there. As a matter of fact, the window that you see there is actually a false window. It's intended because I know you'll see it from the street, but I really can't put glass in there under the code.
In the back, the back brick piece, you probably won't see. Do you agree you won't see that much from the street? A lot of that's going to be, especially at any kind of an angle, is going to be blocked from the building next door. Or
yeah, we believe that's the case. You'll see it in the renderings.
Okay.
So next one. And then the section is just kind of there because it's part of how we figured out how the building would work, but we don't need to talk much about that either.
So I do have a question about the form and function of the way you set up the face on Annapolis Street.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of what's there now, and what's on the building next door that has, a couple of different shops and it kind of thing. It has the lawn that sort of slopes up to the front door.
It does.
And so what's different here is you've got essentially those small retaining walls plus the patios. And so I think, the question I have is, does the fact that those patios are quite segregated from the street function, does that give you pause from a retail standpoint? I think if you've got a restaurant with outdoor seating, it makes that sort of a semi-private space. But from a retail standpoint, if you've got a retail store there that's reliant on browsers, people walking, they're going to have a hard time seeing what's in the window, and then also feel not invited to come up there because that's sort of a semi-private space. So I think it looks nice, and again, if it's a restaurant, it really makes a lot of sense. But does it give you pause as a retail establishment that it's not super inviting to somebody who's just walking down the street?
Well, I would suggest that we think that the height is an advantage here. We're working with the existing grades here. And so I think if you think about the buildings right down the street where the interior designer's office is, those types of things, the change in height is nice because I can see into the shop. So we think if they're well lit and inviting, we think the landscape is actually a draw with these planter areas that we have. And we think that it creates kind of a nice precinct along the street that doesn't feel like it's crowded by the building. So you're kind of trying to balance, a little bit more of a suburban kind of approach to things like you're describing, where there's a lawn in front of the buildings, and the intent to try and make this feel more like it's a kind of contributes to the commercial aspects of the block. So a lot of it looks like it's converted houses. In our case, we're trying to make it look like it's clearly a building where people can come and do things rather than.
Yeah, I guess from a function standpoint, though, to me, it seems to be, taint this and taint that. It's, ideally, for retail, you like the windows to be right up against the sidewalk so people walking down the street can see. But obviously, that's not the form that we have along Annapolis Street. So it would look weird if you pop the building right up against the sidewalk. So I understand. Why it's that way, but
I'm going to jump in here. I think to your point about, if this is a restaurant user, it doesn't really matter. Our intent for this is to anchor the building with a restaurant user that would take up 100% of the commercial space, or maybe 75% of it. So we really designed it and tried to maximize it for that sort of restaurant experience for our end user in the project.
Okay. I just don't want to see the building get built that way and then be unsuccessful from a retail standpoint, that nobody wants to have a shop there because nobody can see what's going on in there. Yeah, so I just have your interest in the interest of the neighborhood in mind, that I want it to be successful, and that gives me a little bit of pause. But
yeah, we need our tenants to do well and get customers so they can make some money, and everyone's happy. So the last thing we want to do is build something that no one's interested in going in. So it's a good point, but I think we're addressing it with the restaurant use we're trying to seek in here.
Okay.
So as we move around the corner here in the renderings, here you can start to see the forms a little more clearly. You can see that there's low planting space adjacent to the sidewalk. And again, the renderings take some liberties in the sense that I didn't draw the power lines because we don't put them in the renderings. They show in some of the other images, but we're really trying to convey to you what the architecture is. So it's not, we're not trying to be misleading by not showing the power lines. I would be happy to see them go away. I'm just not sure that's realistic in West Annapolis in the near future. We all know what it costs to do it on Main Street. So the architecture here, again, works with the traditional forms along Annapolis Street that we see. In the context study we provided with our application, we did a really, what I'll call a comprehensive survey of the entire area of West Annapolis, only because we're doing a good deal of work there. So we want to understand what happens in each area. And these forms are consistent with what we're seeing along this street. You'll see simple gables, you'll see some shed dormers, you'll see a mix of materials like standing seam roof, you'll see some more traditional siding. And then what we added here were trellis elements along the outside. And back to Mr. Waldman's point, Mr. Sale's point, I think it would be great to see some growth over those. I mean, if we could do like a grape arbor up there, that would be lovely. And I think, we have an opportunity to do that. So I think the experience along the pedestrian way will be quite nice. And I think the fact that the building's raised ever so slightly will make it a bit more handsome in my mind, rather than having a sloped yard down to it more like a house would. So as we turn the corner here, you can start to see how the architecture shifts a little bit from front to back. So you'll see the first elements of the piece in the back that starts to work with what we have in the other parts of West Annapolis. We carry some elements through, like the pergolas and the planters and that, and then the architecture kind of slides in behind the building in a slightly different vocabulary that we think works nicely. Go to the next one. So again, thinking about what you'll see from Gittings Avenue here, you can see the planters, and our team is talking about the height of these planters. We might drop these down a bit as it works around with the grade, because I agree that if a planter gets too tall, it starts to feel like more of a barrier. So again, as site design review, we're still trying to work out details like that. And I think your point's well taken. If you want to try and connect the pedestrian experience to the building experience, those are things that we should be looking at. And so we are looking at that with Kevin and the rest of the team. We've got our bike racks out here, and then along the backside, we've decided to create a screen wall that you walk up, that you would go up into the apartments behind. And the screen wall, again, is intended to have green material, landscape material that would grow up from the ground level through this mesh that we'll have on the wall there to allow some green space on that back side, which I think would be really pretty and nice for the tenants.
So let me make a comment about the bike rack.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to just be really blunt here, but that's a completely worthless location for a bike rack. Who's going to use that? Who's your intended user for a bike rack there?
Well,
somebody who's going to use.
Tell me why you think it's a bad place.
It doesn't serve the needs of anybody, because if you're gonna visit one of the retail establishments, why are you going to park it around the corner as if you were parking a car? If you're going to ride a bike to a place, you're going to want to park it right out front. And nobody is ever going to park a bike there. You're going to just waste your money putting a bike rack there. So I think
we can look for another location for
it
that.
should be, if you're going to put one in, it should be right out front, because the value in riding a bike someplace is that you get easy access to where you're going, and you don't have to go through the hassle of parking, as you would a car. That's the value in riding as somebody who rides a bike around most places, that's the value in riding a bike. You can park right in front of where you're going. So if you're going to put a bike rack, you should put it out front on Annapolis Street.
Well, I think I'll take your point under advisement. I think it makes sense to me, Alex. And, I think the requirement is I have one, so I have it, but I would agree with you that we could look at alternative locations that might be more successful.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you want to just check the box and do the checklist engineering, leave it where it is. If you want to make it useful, put it on Annapolis Street.
Well, like I said, your point's well taken. We're going to look at that, see if we can do that.
Okay.
So as I described what was happening in West Annapolis, you can see in the distance at the top of the screen the recently approved project for 106, 108. You can see the gable forms that come up and down Annapolis Street, and then you can see what happens as we come down Gittings, and the forms change a bit. So that was the intent with the difference in the architecture, and we think it's going to work out well. Next slide.
Actually, thank you. Yeah, thank you for putting the subsequent development in that rendering, just in case anybody didn't see that.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about earlier when we try and think about what people are actually going to see, because we were thinking about all of these together and what the different roles are. And we looked at joining those parking lots. It didn't buy us anything. And we looked at how to position the parking, and we thought it was far better to anchor the corners and put the parking in the center. We don't have all the trees rendered in these, but you can get a sense of how this is set. So the corners are well marked, and the space in the middle, the interstitial space, is used for the services we need to provide. But again, it's all pulled back from the street face. So we have a landscape buffer between the cars and the street, which the code requires, but I think is going to be successful.
I could see, I hate to break in, and I'll save other comments for later, but you can see so clearly in this view how if you've got two big curb cuts, and if you only had one curb cut and you designed all of the parking to work together, it would be buffered from the street. You would have one less large curb cut, and you
Exactly.
Large stuff, large shade trees along Gittings. I understand they're two separate applications, but boy, they're from the same source and coming in at the same time. It really says to me, these things should be looked at together.
Well, if you can, let me step back. The code doesn't set us up to do these things easily, right? So you're thinking yes. in a much broader term, which I appreciate very much, but the reality of the code today, the Planning Commission, with the introduction of the members we have on the commission today, you're thinking ahead. You're thinking about things that can happen, but as a practical matter, as the architect, the engineer, the developer, I have to work within the confines of what the code says. Those parking spaces are there only because you're asking me to put them there. A single drive takes away parking, if you can believe it. So a reduction in the parking requirement and some other creative thinking about it would go a long way, but I don't see how I can make that work here.
I would say that you have made it work, Leo. We have lots of shared parking in Eastport now, so I feel like it's definitely doable.
Right, but if you look at the parking lot layout there and you go to one drive and you try and connect the two, I don't get the same number of parking spaces, because it's just like laying out a parking garage. So you have cars that face each other, you have drive aisles and cars that face away from each other. And really, the street is part of that parking layout. So I would lose spaces if I were to do that, which I can't do because I can't meet the code requirement.
But the code requirement is flexible because, we're transforming into a more flexible code. But I mean, you've got some planners on the call right now that, they're often working with variances, and we've seen it done. So I was just saying, it is a possibility. That sounds like it's not an attractive possibility for you guys for some reason. I don't understand, but.
Well, because it would take months and months to do it.
Did you ever just sit down with a piece of paper and a pencil and see what happens if you put the two parkings together?
We sure did.
You did?
Yes, we did. We spent a lot of time on that, and
Do you think that you might, at the next time we get together, do you think you might share one of those sketches with us?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
We like to be convinced that it can't be done.
Yeah, I'd be happy to look at it.
I'm going to chime in here as well. I hear what you guys are saying with all this. This project on the left at 100 Ridgely that we'll talk about next month, this is a residential project. So this will be 4 townhomes. And for a project like that, in some ways, it's nice to have a dedicated parking area. If I'm coming home from work and I'm trying to pull into my residence, I don't want to be competing with someone who might be in my parking space at a restaurant use. So for what we have programmed over here, we actually think that this setup works pretty well. And then just to reiterate Leo's point, we looked at combining both parcels and trying to figure out what all this could look like and what we could yield in terms of our developable product at the end of the day. Basically was what we have right here, right? It's an incredibly narrow site, this second parcel up top, and you're just very limited on what we can do here. So even if we did combine it, to Leo's point, we'd be losing parking spaces and it would be decreasing the sort of the size of the buildings that we're trying to build.
So let's go to the next slide, Andrew. So, the renderings you just saw are really kind of our, they're kind of, I'll call them line diagrams that are three-dimensional from some software, but we really wanted to kind of study this thing in a little more detail. So we shifted gears and go to a different package for how we can more clearly study the materials and the relationships and get up closer and get into a little more detail about what we've got. So these images, I think, really tell the tale. I mean, again, I understand the concerns about the experience from a pedestrian standpoint along Annapolis Street, but these were developed in conjunction with Campion Ruby in terms of the landscape plan. And again, we're not showing everything, but we're trying to give you a sense of what we think is available between the curb and the building. And we think it's really quite nice. This is how it sets into the context with the adjacent building, and you can see that's where the interior design office is. It's got the twin gables. We picked up the gable again. We tried to keep our heights consistent with what they've got in place, and our setbacks from the street face, again, are consistent with the scale and character of the adjacent properties. Here you can see it from, as we turn the corner, again, you can see the green on the corner. There's a good deal of space there. Now, Alex, I think your point's well taken, and I think we could look at putting the bike racks in a different location to make them a little more useful. Perhaps a bench could move around the side and the bike racks could be close to the location where the woman's sitting, and that might be a little bit more useful. So I think that's
Alex, I'm just going to say we're going to dedicate this to Alex Pline bike rack and get your little plaque on it.
I'll make sure to lock my bike there if I eat at the restaurant.
There we go.
Okay, can somebody go back to that last slide for a second? Now, if Alex can get a bike rack, I can certainly get a pin oak right on the corner of Gittings and Annapolis. That will be so beautiful, folks.
There's a huge power pole right there.
Yeah, see, I leave all the hard stuff out.
Oh,
so
God, because it's so stark. It is so stark. And the beautiful pin oak that, there's some big trees there. I just feel like one big tree on the corner would work. Okay, never mind. If you can't do it because there's a pole, is the pole right there, right on the corner?
Yes, about 5 feet from the corner.
You can't do it on either side? It's not going to be
BG&E
viable.
frowns on it.
We'll look at it.
You can plant whatever you want for the first 10 years, and then you got to chop it.
I know if it's not going to work, it's not going to work. But I just feel like that whole corner looks terrible without something there. But
well, no,
I would argue it's not terrible, but I would also say that we might have another opportunity for some more landscape there.
Okay.
So again, then as we work around the other side of the building, here's our view from Gittings Avenue, and you can get a sense of the character of the building and that type of thing. So I'll go to the next one, Andrew. So we just wanted to finish where we started. I think it's a compelling project. We're excited to see the building go up there. We're seeing, kind of a slow progression in how West Annapolis is changing ever so slowly. I think in some ways people wish it would happen faster. In other ways, they don't want it to happen too fast. So we tried to blend those two things. I think from a development standpoint, we'd all like to see more housing and more units and, more affordable housing, all of that kind of stuff, and more green. But, these changes take time. And so we've tried to hedge this project towards the future with some of the uses we put in place and the scale of the units, that type of thing. And, try and make West Annapolis more vibrant with another opportunity for new businesses to come in and succeed. And so we've set the table, we believe, for that to happen. And with that, I'll take questions.
I have another question about feedback from the West Annapolis Community Association. There's some email traffic in the package about that, and that they made some suggestions earlier in the summer, and there was some traffic about getting together for a meeting. I don't know if that ever happened, but so there were some suggestions, and I'm curious, were any of the suggestions that they made incorporated, or is this essentially sort of the same design that they were looking at?
No, we looked at all the comments that came in. They're public records. So, and EJ's reached out to try and set those up. I'll let him to speak to that in a minute. But how the process works for our office. We try and listen to all the pieces that come in, and sometimes we don't initially agree with what comes back, but you let that sink in for a little bit. You think about what that feedback is trying to accomplish, and we incorporate as much of it as makes sense to us. So one of the things we were hearing was that the building looked too contemporary. So we went back and looked again at some of the fenestration and the elements on the street face to try and make it feel a little softer. And I think all of these pieces are a gesture towards that. And I think we ended up with a better project because of it. So that's where we are.
Yeah, I guess so there were changes made from the time that they provided some feedback.
Sure. I mean, the progression of the design was going along as we were getting that feedback. So we took it into account.
Okay, because the last email traffic that I saw in the neighborhood was that, requesting that people go make comments for this meeting, but that the WACA board was satisfied with the changes that had been made. And I just wanted to get your...
That's correct, yep.
Yeah, I just wanted to get your impression of from your side of how that went.
Leo, I have two questions. One of them having to do with the trellises. Are they designed to be shade trellises?
They are, and they always are. The idea is that you can get filtered light through at certain times of the day when it's less problematic, when the sun's high and it can come straight through. But a lot of time in the evenings or in the mornings where the glare is uncomfortable, the vertical elements in the construction of the trellis helps to block some of that light without blocking, air and everything else. So yeah, that's the general intent, is to have.
Because a couple of things. That the library put in a trellis along a walkway, and it's just square pieces of metal, and so it doesn't really do anything. And if you have a trellis like that, it's almost as if you have to plant something. But if you start planting things, you end up having to maintain those plantings. And sometimes that can become problematic. But if the trellis is designed with louvers, then you don't really have to plant things in order to provide shade. So you understand my question? Are they?
I do it. I do, and it's in the detail.
That's my only. Or is it just decorative?
No, it's to provide shade.
Okay.
I mean, we like the way it looks, so we put it on there. But again, these things are designed in such a way so that you think about again, these vertical elements that are sitting on the other elements are designed so as the sun sets, more of the sun is blocked as it enters into the building, so they don't become uncomfortable. So they're kind of a green element that go on these buildings if they're designed correctly. Now, I won't pretend that we have all of that figured out yet. Again, when we're putting this stuff together, it's really, is this idea viable? We think it is. So as we get into the details of that, that'll all be part of what we think about. Now, I would like to see this thing with, some growies all over that stuff, because it would be really nice. And, I think that changes the character of the space, and we see it in other places downtown. So I think that's a real possibility.
Okay, well, because I think that they're an excellent addition. I think that they're an excellent addition. I think no more needs to be said. I'd like to turn my attention though to these living walls that you have in the back.
Sure.
I also think conceptually, I think that they're an excellent idea. Those are south-facing walls. They're going to get huge amounts of sun and heat. If indeed a living wall works. Could work incredibly well. I have no experience with them. I just want to point out, though, there's a maintenance issue with them forever. And I am concerned about what they're planted in, and making, making sure that there's enough soil there that's protected, that things will grow well, because otherwise you'll just end up with a useless hot metal screen.
Right, right. So, again, we work with Kevin pretty closely, and, we have not seen historically many of these types of arrangements in Annapolis, but my personal experience is that my neighbor has a really beautiful grape arbor, and we also see a lot of trumpet vine, and we see other types of vines that really, we see, gosh, there's a house on Southgate that has the purple flowers all over the.
Yeah, but those are, I just caution you against them because wisteria, because, woo, it'll be in your bed next. I mean, they're powerful, powerful plants. And I'm sure you'll be careful, because there's some things that are, given to this, and then will then lose their leaves for the winter, and you'll gain some, some solar light in the winter, which is what you want. But for most of the year and for the hot summers, it could be an elegant solution, but it needs to be, carefully designed in terms of.
I agree with you. I mean, it's one of those.
So I really am just complimenting you and cautioning you at the same time.
Well, we appreciate it. I mean, that's why we have Kevin here, because, we come up with these ideas, and mercifully EJ's tolerant in terms of how much we're going to spend on it. And so, we think it would, again, these are what we think are the elements that make it from just a development project to something a bit more. And so they've gone a long way, and we can go just a little further here with this stuff. I think we can get a good outcome.
Okay, I'll reserve any further comments until after we hear if there's anybody from the public who chimes in the next 2 weeks. But thank you. It was an excellent presentation, and I really appreciate not only this, but the really full-featured and informative notebook. And so far, it looks to be a very elegant and sensitive design. And I appreciate all the work that's gone into it. It does appear to me at this point that landscaping and things like the heights of those boxes and so forth, that's the kind of work that needs to be done. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just like to comment.
I would really like to see, Diane, excuse me. I would really like to see just even a sketch that explains to me why a conjoined parking situation wouldn't work. So if you have the time and you're able to do that, I hate to send you to more expense, but I would really like to see that.
No, it's beautiful. It's already done. I mean, it's very easy for us to show you that. I mean, we've already looked at it pretty closely. So I'm happy to spend a few minutes at our next meeting, either before or after the live session, to share it with the rest of the group, and we can have a discussion about it. I think we're on the same page. I'd love to see that stuff happen, but you've got to take the realities of the code into consideration. I wish we didn't, but we do.
I hear you. Thank you.
Yeah, no, we had looked at it fairly extensively before we considered just doing these two parcels, 101 and 103 together, meeting with Kevin Scott, and I think Tom, you may have been there too, tackling this thing as a planned development. And the hurdles were pretty significant, and the upside was almost non-existent. And I'm not so sure, if memory serves, I'm not so sure the intent of going a planned development route would have been satisfied. So we didn't get great feedback on it, but we did explore it pretty extensively. But sure, Leo and Terry may even have the drawings readily available, which we will definitely share with you.
Great. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Sure. I didn't have any other questions for Leo. I guess just generally in conclusion, Leo, you believe this project complies with all applicable standards and, in your professional opinion, merits approval?
I do.
Great. Well, that concludes our presentation, and thank the
Got some
commissioners
questions
for their
for Leo.
comments.
I wanted to get in some comments for Leo. You kind of
Sure.
went ahead, I believe, but Diane, you want to go first? You had a question, Diane?
Yeah, sure. I was just looking through, there were a lot of positive comments, but there was one comment from the public that was really extensive, and it talked about the fact, starts out with, I'm very disappointed that MRE has not been more sensitive to the neighborhood feedback. And Alex was asking the question about the feedback and working with the community association there. It sounds like from reading this one particular letter that we, or feedback comment that we got today, that MRE was, or the architect was willing to work on the facade on Annapolis Street, but didn't take into account their comments about the way the back and the side of the building looked. And they described it as, it looked like a prison, metal gritting everywhere, clunky square flat roof, boring mismatched brick. The back doesn't look anything like anything in West Annapolis or even Annapolis, and certainly nothing would be nothing of this kind of architecture. And I see what this person means, because the front really does look nice in terms of I mean, not so much the landscaping, but the, you know, the way the roof sits, and it looks like it fits in with West Annapolis, but the back kind of looks like it belongs in a another part of the city. It looks much more formal and office-like. So I guess, did you work with the neighbors at all on trying to soften that a little bit?
Well, we did. And that's one of the reasons you see the trellis assembly in the back, and you see some of the changes in materials, and you know, we tried to soften it a bit. You know, as I described in the beginning, the building is intended to be that very transition. And, you know, while, you know, there's a lot of people to try and make happy, and we try and listen as much as we can, but you have to stay true to the design intent here. And, you know, we feel strongly that, you know, the approach we've taken is the right one.
So can you comment on the congruity between the backside of this and what, and I know this is a subject for next month, but the congruity between the design of the backside of this and the row townhouses that are going to be on the other side of the parking lot?
What I can just
how do those go together?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I said, you know, and you know, the context study tells us an awful lot, and the three-dimensional imagery we showed of the area tells us a lot. You know, as I said, each area is different, and the change happens somewhere, and it can be abrupt, or it can be kind of a thought through transition. And I think what you'll see between this building and the adjacent structure is there's kind of a softer transition that doesn't happen from one building to the next, but it starts to happen in one building and then is reflected more clearly in the next one. So I would say it's kind of, you know, it's doing just what we think it ought to be doing. Now, you know, there's always going to be somebody who doesn't agree with the architecture. You know, we do this all the time, and I get it, but, you know, I would respectfully disagree with the conclusions they're drawing about how it really works.
And my last comment is, you know, I do think it's a compelling project, Leo and team. I really think a restaurant there is a great opportunity. So I, like Alex and everyone else, hopes that this is successful. We're just trying to do our best to make it look as great as it can look. And oh, one last thing, MPDUs. I know we're always talking about affordability, and we always give you guys an opportunity to provide affordable housing. Will any of the 4 units be affordable?
It's not our intention right now to have any in this project, no.
Okay, thanks. That's all I have.
All right, Leo, hopefully I can make you laugh here without making you come shoot me. Man, I think the city and maybe the Hyatts ought to pay for you to go on a year international travel tour to have a midlife architectural ephany, man. Because
the Hyatts, wait a second.
Yeah, come on. Because this structure in the front looks like many that we've seen before, like it belongs in Eastport almost. And also it looks to me like the 70s, 80s structure that exists in West Annapolis that you just revamped, but it's not. It's a total raising of 2 and then a rebuilding. On the backside, it looks to me like I'm in Eastport between Severn Avenue and the Spa Creek. You know, it's like, man, it's just, I didn't expect to see this in West Annapolis. I expected village feel. I expected more of a New York village feel, something totally different. I was extremely surprised, but then again, not surprised that I saw this from Leo and Hammond Wilson. So man, I would really like to see you take a long, year-long off-paid trip to get some architectural ideas, especially, you know, this is a corner lot. And when I'm used to seeing corner lots that the building goes from one street and then curves around to the other with balconies on the second level. And I know you probably got some restrictions here, but it seems to me that the building's totally just facing Annapolis Street and doesn't bend around to cover Gittings well. And that upper above the trellis there, that looks so bland. I mean, could you do something? Maybe throw in a little, Juliet balcony, something there. It just seems to me like a wasted spot. And then also on the front above where it says tenant one signage, I know you have roof, and I don't know what's inside of the building really right behind there. I can't think after looking at these drawings for the last couple of days. But again, balcony, something up there to maybe liven it up a little. It just looks too 70, 80-ish time frame revamped a little bit to me. But everybody's got an opinion. But I'm just saying, it seems to me that you could do more on that transition around to Gittings, or more above the trellis. And in the back, I get it on the back with, with the what's going on back there. But for me, really, my issue is the front, the transition around to the side. And before you make a comment, yes, Ms. Trudy McFall sent in a comment from the public, and she was not liking the architecture and felt that working with the West Annapolis Civic Association, they made a lot of recommendations, and they feel that they weren't necessarily encompassed. At least she felt that way. I didn't see any other comments from the West Annapolis Civic Association. That was really the only one that made kind of a not liking it. Everybody else in the comments seems to be for it. And I like it. I like what you're doing, but I think you can do better here. Can we? I mean.
Well, you sound like my mom now.
Good. I'm making you laugh, or you're really ticked late at night. That's all I'm going to limit it to my comments. So, hey, can you do something?
Story, just very briefly, I did a house for my parents, and my mother, who she's very capable artistically, and she said, "I'm not sure what it is, but I think you can do better." And so that was the comment I got, and I was like, "Wow, that's not really very instructive." But in your case, you've given me some things to think about. I will just point one thing out. We're seeing a trend in some of the more contemporary times where a lot of the detail is stripped away in these forms, right? And you can see it in any magazine you go to take a look at. Commercial architecture that's trying to do something that feels more traditional is now coming back to us as a little bit stripped down and a little bit more crisp. And it's not my nature to do it that way, but in this case, I think we're in the right direction. So, I think you give us the latitude to do it, and I think you're going to be surprised with what you see in the end.
Yeah, because to me, this just feels that in Eastport, in between Severn Avenue, where you go eat at Ruth's Chris and Lunis's, between there and Spa Creek, it has this kind of period blah feel to me. And I'm like, that to me doesn't scream West Annapolis. Now, it could if everything goes that way. I get it. And I mean, variety's fine. But to me, that's just my opinion. It's over to you, developer, and the people to come together and get what you want, obviously. And as long as it fits within the code. But there you go. It's my opinion. Anyone else?
So I just wanted to say this, being a neighbor in West Annapolis and the other folks who are also live in the neighborhood, there was an email that came out to the entire neighborhood that addressed part of that issue of the WACA feedback, and I'll just read part of it. It says the WACA board, so this was inviting people to comment for tonight's meeting, but it says the last sentence is, the WACA board reviewed a prior iteration of these plans over the summer and gave some design feedback to the developer MRE. We are pleased to see our feedback taken into consideration as the plans were revised. So that's at least from the WACA, from the West Annapolis Community Association board, that I take that to be that their feedback was incorporated.
But that's not in our comment forms. Where did you get that from?
It was sent out to all the West Annapolis neighbors in the neighborhood. I can forward that, and you can put it in the.
Please do, because that's important feedback. Thank you. Okay. That's good to know. I don't want to be hammering Leo if everything's been hammered out already with the neighborhood. That's unfair, because everybody's got an opinion.
Yeah,
come on.
And Alex, you got to be careful, because they'll consider that an ex parte communication. You won't be able to vote on this project.
Okay.
He's part of the neighborhood. It's unavoidable. I think that's one.
I can't not.
But if you share, if you're bringing it to us and sharing it with all of us, then it becomes non-ex parte, because you're now sharing it with everybody in a public forum. And we'll also put that on e-track it as part of the public comment, if we can. Please. and that'll help us out. So there
Yeah,
you go,
thanks.
Leo.
Thanks a lot.
For a year, you know.
We'll keep working at it. That's why
Tammy,
they call it the practice.
Tammy, what exhibit number are you giving that one?
2 years, maybe. All right.
Where, is that going to be cities?
That,
Wait a minute.
well, that's a
Say again?
planning commission. Planning commission's putting that in the record. So how are you labeling that?
I would put it under the city staff, and I would label it C2.
Okay.
I recommend that we take that one in the category theme of public comment, because it's a public comment supplied by one of the commissioners that he's bringing it fairly to all of us to consider. And so that then becomes a non-ex parte communication, in my view, from my
I
interpretation.
agree.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I just forwarded that to the commission, Kevin and Tammy.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank
Cooper.
you.
Very useful. Very useful. And bike racks, evidently you stink at bike racks, Leo, so you gotta do something about that, so.
Fair enough.
I'd like to remind everybody, this is a public hearing.
Yes, it is, but we're adding a little levity. We are the public. I know.
So Ben, can I just tell you that, or you obviously probably know, but the next hearing that this gets continued to is December 3rd. The hearing that we are planning to schedule due to scheduling timeline would be December 17th for the 100 Ridgely project. So you won't exactly see them at the same time. Maybe Leo will kind of incorporate what they're planning into one of their illustrations.
You're
I think it showed up.
taking away my thunder for later. Yeah, because you have two projects bordering each other, and we're going to hear them in different time frames, when in essence you would definitely want to consider both of them.
You could see it in the background of one of his images earlier.
Yeah, and we can talk about that once we get out of the presentation. How about that? Can we first move, and Mr. Hyatt, do you have any more items to present? I believe you don't.
We don't. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so thank you, Mr. Hyatt. That'll conclude your presentation. And now we'll move into the to more questions from the commission amongst ourselves that we can now ask from either staff or the developer and bounce back into things. I know we couldn't help but go into things as he was going through the briefing. I guess I'm going to undo my initial comments, and I think now that probably sounded like the better thing to do as we went through. It seemed to be more efficient. Mr. Waldman led us that way, and I guess it really is a good way to go. But here we are. We've just had the presentation. We've had staff give us their comments, and we have two properties that are being redeveloped into one, and that one property adjoins another development that has not come to the commission yet, but will come to the commission. This brings up the issue of hearing them separately or together, and how we can gain advantages by combining the abilities of two of these properties. So it was brought up previously by commissioners, and I think we need to talk about that now. How do we want to handle that? And how could maybe the applicants handle that? And first we'll start off with staff. Back to you, Kevin, to continue your comments on that.
What were you wanting me to continue with?
You were talking, well, okay, well then I'll continue it for you. We have these two properties coming at us, these two applications coming at us at different times. This is the first one, and the next one is coming, when did you say, Kevin? In mid-December or after?
December 17th would be the soonest we could meet the advertising deadline.
Okay. And we had talked about possibly in between those two properties, maybe making or considering putting a driveway in the back as just one instead of two, to do it like we do in Eastport. Ms. Butler brought that up.
Just to be clear,
I'm going to chime in here, and I don't mean to speak out of turn and be rude, but that's just not something that we're sort of willing to explore or do for this. So I'm not sure if it's worth discussing at all.
yeah, well, just to be clear, Mr. Chairman, legally speaking, we've made the determination to have two separate major site design plan applications. They're going to run somewhat congruently, but they're entirely separate. There's no guarantees that we end up moving forward with the second project. So we need to really look at this one independently. There is potentially in the future the opportunity for some shared parking arrangement that we could explore, but that's kind of a secondary review, if you will, separate and apart from this project, because that other project, 100 Ridgely, isn't the subject of this hearing or
Okay.
application.
I appreciate your opinion, Mr. Hyatt. And back to the original point that I was going after, which you addressed. Thank you. But, you know, as Diane brought up and some others, maybe there is something that we could do there. And maybe we could get both of these applicants to agree to do something. But how would we do that? Have we ever done anything like that in the past, Bob, in Eastport or anywhere else that you might recall? Bob Waldman?
I do think that they are technically two separate applications. I understand that. But the fact of the matter on the ground is that they're conjoined and they're owned by the same applicant. And I do think that we have power of agenda and we would like to discuss it. There may be encouragement. There may be some avenues to explore. I think that the first step would be to see if it does make sense in terms of site design and land use and whether it actually can be done and fits the needs of both of the technically separate applications. And we could see where we go from there. It may be that opportunities open up simply because people have looked at this, more eyes have looked at this. So while formally we're looking at two separate applications, I think it would behoove the applicant to bring in some information, and it's certainly within our powers to have a discussion about anything we want to discuss.
Thank you, Mr. Waldman. I think that's great. Now, I'm going to ask Mr. Hyatt, is it true that both of those applications are owned by the same developer?
Well, there's separate legal entities, but they're the same, principles, and I just don't see the significance there. They're two separate projects, legally speaking. I'm not so sure.
Fair enough.
And you'd need the maybe the city attorney or Kevin or someone could chime in. I'm not so sure that there's any legal authority that the Planning Commission has or otherwise to compel property owners to combine two projects that are independent, standing on their own.
I don't think that we could force that to occur. But I think that the discussion may open up some possibilities, and we could adjust the calendars so that they could be discussed during the same hearings. I agree with you. I don't think that they could be coerced into this, but one never knows what some of the good possibilities are that might save the developer money, make for a better streetscape. These are the kinds of things that I think are worth discussing at this point. And so I look forward to that.
That's great, Mr. Wellman. And I'm going to just challenge with this one statement. I get it, Mr. Hyde, two separate applications, and I get it. But I challenge you and the developer, is there anything you could see where you could benefit? Maybe less cost of paving, get more parking space and trade that for square footage somewhere else, something that is good for all parties. I challenge you to take a quick look say, hey, if we could look at this from a two application perspective, but how could they benefit from that adjoining barrier there, that adjoining property line? If there's something you guys can find that helps you and makes things more profitable for you, or makes the whole situation better, and maybe we as a commission can help you by bending elsewhere to help you and also help us. I'm not sure where that is or how that would be, but something to think about.
Sure. I appreciate the thought, and I believe I mentioned it before, and apologies if I thought it in my head and didn't say it out loud, but we did explore combining all three properties in the same application through a plan development. We met with Kevin Scott and Tom Smith, and we went through, and Sally, and we went through the economics of it, and it ended up not making sense. I mean, we spent several months, and I'm sure the applicant spent thousands of dollars going through draft plans, and we worked through the code, and we tried to figure out, could we get some more square footage here? Could we have shared parking between the two? Could we have shared parking with one of these other nearby properties to get some density and really liven up the streetscape along the Gittings Avenue side? it just didn't work out. And
Okay.
ultimately we decided this made the most sense. And while I think we agree with you, the idea of having back-to-back parking lots on a street isn't ideal. That's the code, and that's what we have to live with. There's nothing to say that in the future we couldn't, modify something down the road, have a shared parking arrangement, get some variances after the fact, and it sounds like there's support for something like that. We could explore it, but again, and I won't belabor the point. Right now, we're really looking at this thing 101, 103 kind of on its own.
Okay. And I'll just say from my side, and maybe I think my fellow commissioners will support me on this, but if there's something that you can find in the near term that you want to all of a sudden exploit and say, hey, maybe we could do this, if we can ask for a variance or something that helps everything, let's think about that. I'm sure, obviously it sounds like you already have, but anything that can be thought of. Any other commissioners have any comment?
No, I look forward to next session.
Okay. So as far as agenda for the next session, we are not looking at adding that other application on, but just we're throwing that out there. If there's something you want or something that you could find to benefit both sides, and we can go ahead and think about that rather than having two parking lots with two entrances and yada yada. But
Yeah,
there you
no, we appreciate the thought, and we'll recircle up as a team and take a look again and look through our notes and see if we can't come up with anything. And we'll get back to you if there is.
Good.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you, EJ. Mr. Rumpke, thank you.
All right, commissioners, any other questions for the developer or staff at this point? Okay, hearing nothing from the commissioners, and it's 9:44. We are opened up for public comment. And I've already named the public comments that we have, all 7 of them. And I will go through, we can go through real quickly the ones we have and add on the rest at the next meeting. And I will choose to display each one really quickly. And I'll make this as rapid as I can and getting the point across. Share screen for the public comments. And this is Dan Sandel's, the first one of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. First one of 7. You should see this. Very quick. In support for 101, 103, and he's the owner of 104 Ridgely Avenue building. And the property is adjacent to his. He says adjacent, which to me across the street because it's an even numbered property. Go to the next one. This is from Frederick Depew in support. And he's from, I'm not sure how you pronounce that. I've always pronounced it Flemont, with my French background, but if anybody else knows how to properly pronounce Flemont. Flamant. Yeah, I know Alex was going to laugh at that one. Here's from Mr. James Nolan. Lives on 55 Arundel Road, which is back a couple of blocks off from the project, and strong support for the development. Lived there for 35 years. We have Mr. Rosso from Rosso Commercial. And you can notice the 1 Annapolis Street, Suite 101. Also in support. Likes the design, Leo. So, hey, that throws my comments out, huh? So, and here, this one's sent in via our online application tool from Patricia Meinhold. And the question here was, is there any way to preserve the existing mature trees on the 2 properties? And that was thoroughly discussed earlier, as there would have issues with those 2 mature trees during the construction process, and also not advisable. And we would all hate to see 2 huge trees go that way, because it takes away from the feel of West Annapolis, from its shaded village type feel, but they're going to do a 3-to-1 replacement. And if you want to know the full explanation from that, you can rewind this brief about 2 hours ago, hour and a half ago to that section. Thank you, Ms. Meinhold. And also we have Ryan Brissell in support and thinks it will fit in very well, also from Rosa Commercial. And finally, at the end, I believe Diane, you and I both brought out this one from Ms. Trudy McFall. Ms. Trudy McFall was part of the development committee for West Annapolis Civic Association. I believe she was the sub chair for that part of it, and not very happy with Leo's village feel of the building and the character. I believe she also will help us fund Leo on an international travel trip for a year. So there we go. And her objection, she feels the front is okay, but the back is and the side is not really that great, to say the least. And we also will have the comment submitted from Mr. Alex Pline. That will do it for the public comment that we have submitted. All of our chairmen have been provided these comments. I'm sorry, all of our commission has been provided these comments, and we've just displayed them to you. They're also going to be available via e-Track-It if you go into the Planning and Zoning Department's webpage that the city hosts, and you can get to this information through e-Track-It. I will stop the share there. Any other comments from the commissioners with regard to the public comments that we received already? Okay, hearing none of that, nothing in comment to the comments we received. And it's getting late. We are going to keep open the public comment session till the next meeting. And the next meeting, anyone in the public, you can submit more comments through the Planning and Zoning Department webpage. We have a portal there. You can submit comments just like some of the ones I've shown you, and they will just be displayed during our meeting and brought up for comment. Also, they will be provided to the commissioner as well prior to the meeting to read as soon as we can get them. So please try to beat that noon on the meeting day of date. So the earlier you get it to us, the earlier we can consider it as commissioners and take it into consideration, looking at our plans that we have. Anything else from, I see Diane's comment there, thank you. Anyone else have anything to add with regards to this before we put a pause onto the public comment section and go into any other miscellany for this meeting? From the applicant, is there anything else you'd like to say of applicant representation before we go off into the rest of our agenda from the application? And you will have another chance when we come back to also add on anything that's changed at the next meeting. Mr. Hyatt?
No, we appreciate your consideration, and happy to answer more questions next month.
All right, thank you. Any other commissioners? Okay, well, we will move right along then. The public comment will stay open for that item for the public hearing. And now we move on to miscellany. Section G. Is there any miscellany items that the commissioners would like to bring up? And as far as the applicants are concerned and your representation, please feel free to log off. And we thank you very much for your efficient presentation tonight. It was well done. And thank you, everyone. So for the rest of the commissioners talking about I wonder if that's a real tree you got behind you, Dave. For the calendar, we're looking forward. And our next meeting, we have in 2 weeks, which is going to be December 3rd. Is everyone going to be able to make that? I should be able to be here. We have quorum, Mr. Waldman.
Yes, I should be here.
Yes,
Okay.
me. I can do it.
Okay. And then after that, the next meeting would be December 17th, which is the week just prior to Christmas. Or would we have everyone be able to show up for that? Or I don't know if we're going to have enough for an agenda item, but if we're looking at canon one, it would be either that meeting or the December 7th meeting. December 7th.
I may have some
I'll be
trouble.
around the 17th.
Okay.
I'm here. I have no life.
It's COVID. We all have no life somewhat. We're just commission meeting twice. We're meeting every other week, and I know it's a lot for everybody. And coming around the holidays, I mean, it's like, come on. So, okay. So December 3rd, Thursday, and then December 17th, Thursday, sounds like we'll have a quorum. And then December 7th, a day which will live in infamy. I'm sorry. No, January 7th. I don't have to worry about that. Sorry, my apologies. It's getting late. Will be the next meeting, January 7th. Okay, any other miscellaneous items to talk about other than agenda or what's coming up in the future? All right, from planning and zoning, is Dr. Nash still on or is she gone?
She has left, but
Well,
do
smartly
you
so.
need anything to convey to her?
No, I was gonna ask if there's, not that I want to drag this meeting any further, but if there's anything else that we needed to hear, but for me, there's nothing. If we get anything up, let's see, the two subjects outside of the norm for us at the moment would be the committee being stood up for the maritime zoning. We'll talk about that probably more so at our December 3rd meeting. And also any updates for the Forest Drive Eastport sector study team that is looking at that. We'll try to hit that up with a little bit of information on December 3rd. Is there anything else you're bringing to December 3rd meeting, Kevin, that you know of? Big projects? That's 2 weeks.
I'm not.
Yeah.
I think Tom's still listening. Do you have anything, Tom?
Nothing official. I may have a work session for the second meeting in December to add to the agenda.
Okay, and I think there was some legislation forwarded up the chain that we're going to have come on December 3rd, but I'm not exactly sure if they're going to present it on the 3rd or the 17th.
Now, coming up soon, you're going to see the Public Works facility for 39 Hudson, so that will probably be January.
Okay. I mean, it really is coming at us. There's a lot of meat of packages to look at coming at us. So, oh,
you're telling me.
Any other comments from the commissioners? Things to add?
I move we adjourn.
Yeah, that's a good move, and I'll second that motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.